All right. Hello and welcome everybody to the Game Dev Show. I don't know if that stuttered for you guys, but it was definitely weird and choppy for me. Welcome, Jason and Andrew. Today we're going to be talking about game dev stuff, like lots of game dev stuff. Answering lots of questions was kind of the main goal for the day. So if you've got game dev questions, Unity questions, please start submitting them, drop them into chat. But there were also a couple of quick things to announce. The first one, before I forget, is that Andrew's just released a new low poly spider on the asset store. That's linked down in the description below. And if you want to get more of Andrew's stuff and one of my courses, that's available in the Humble bundle that's linked down below for, I think it's only $30, right, Andrew?
Yep.
You got a couple $1,000s worth of art assets and other stuff. And the final thing that I wanted to make sure to mention was that there's the inspiration sale going on, the Unity asset store inspiration sale, where things are, looks like anywhere from 40 to 55% off depending on what you spend, if I remember the numbers right. It's like 40%, and then you could get up to an additional 15%, I think, or maybe it was 10, somewhere around there. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. I've listed some of my favorite assets in that sale down below from a video that I did about that, and I figured if anybody's got something that's on sale in that, please let me know that you think is really good that's on sale right now that I should grab. Let me know before it goes off so I can grab it. So welcome. I got all that out of the way, guys. I think I might be losing my voice here, but are you guys ready to take questions, or do you want to jump in with any exciting news or other stuff?
No, I've no exciting news on my side. I'm just here to answer questions today, so I'm happy to jump in.
Yes, questions are great.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's start with this first one that just popped up from James. It says, is game dev hard if you've been a programmer professionally before? Well, I would say yes, but it's also more than worth it. So in my opinion, personally, having done a lot of game development programming and enterprise stuff and done quite a bit back and forth for a bunch of companies, enterprise development is most of the time a bit less complicated and a bit easier to do. The problems that you're dealing with, at least in my experience, have usually been more in a box where I have to deal with a very specific problem and I don't have to worry about too much overlap with other things. I don't have to worry about different devices and different platforms or different player devices and their performance. I have to worry about people constantly breaking my stuff. Not nearly as much as with game development. With game devs or with games, I find that the things are just a little bit more complex. You have to deal with more moving parts at once. But it's not like it's that much harder. I think of it as maybe like 20% harder, but like 100% more rewarding, because the things that I get to build and see people get really excited about and I get to show that to people and everybody enjoys it, and I have a lot more fun building those projects. So I'd say it's I wouldn't say hard. It's a little bit more, it's a little confusing at first. And it's hard to remember not to just try to force in enterprise patterns where they don't necessarily fit too. But outside of that, I don't think it's hard. I think if you're interested in it, you should definitely give it a try. What do you guys think?
I'd say for me, I think the problems are different. The enterprise stuff, I agree with you in that it's on the surface, it's easier because there's more resources. The resources are very targeted into what you're doing. When you're looking for game dev resources, you're hitting and hoping. You're just Googling and hoping for the best. The one thing I will say, though, is at enterprise level, when you work on things, they're usually a bit more mission critical in terms of like when things break, depends on the projects you're working on, that can drastically affect money or, problems with, because in my case, I was working for banking software in some cases. So in games, I mean, if it breaks, just do another build, right? There tends not to be as much of a worry about code not being bulletproof. So there's a lot more of an expectation for things to work right the first time. I don't know. I don't think it's that difficult. I will say though, you 100% nailed it with, I think every programmer that goes from one to the other tries to bring in all the baggage from the stuff they've learned before, and it's very difficult at the start. You find yourself constantly fighting with expectations and doing it the wrong way, and it's a pain in the ass. So It happens. I definitely think that you have to get over the hump of trying to make game engines look like enterprise code, and then once you've realized that's not a good strategy, then you sort of chill out a bit and start writing it in a game dev way, and things are a bit easier.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. I just wanted to point out the part that you'd mentioned about not having to worry about like causing major problems is another big thing for me. It's one of the things that I always worry, like my friends that do software for like airplanes or healthcare stuff, all those things. Like I wonder, like that's got to be so stressful knowing that like if you screw up, somebody's dead or there's like serious consequences. Where if I screw up, like somebody lost their sword. Oh no, we can probably fix that. You know?
I did once write a piece of software where I forgot to dispose of an iDisposable that was doing a connection. It was using some, I think it was Active Directory parser or something. Anyway, it was this thing that worked perfectly fine with 1, 2, 100 people. It's all fine. But when I was finished and I published it, the head of the company, and I'm talking like a giant international company, emailed everybody and said, okay, the web portal's open. You can all go use it now. And so thousands of people hit it at once. And then obviously the poor little code I wrote crashed under the weight of all of this garbage being generated. And then it just crapped out. And it's like suddenly there was panic and I had to go and solve stuff immediately. And it was just literally, I forgot to write dispose in one place. And yeah, that happened.
Oh man. Andrew, you got any thoughts on this one, or should we jump over to the next one?
I was not a professional programmer before, so I don't know what it was like to be that before. I was a non-professional programmer before, and I think for me, the switch to Unity. I mean, I did some very light web programming before: HTML, PHP, some MySQL, a lot of copy paste from the internet, and a lot of just hacking away until I got something that worked that probably wasn't good.
So don't worry, neither of those things change. We both still do that all the time.
I know, that's how I started with Unity too. Switching over to Unity though was there was a lot more to learn. I think there was the efficiency of the code mattered a lot more. With the web stuff, it loaded and it didn't take too long, so it was fine. I don't know if it could have been made more efficient. Almost certainly it could have been. But with Unity, I fell into the everything in the update loop camp for a good chunk of time. And I'm not embarrassed to say that there was a moment in time where I thought, what's a method? I don't understand that. I don't get it. And so that, switching over to Unity forced efficiency to be more front and center than anything else. And it forced, I guess, just basic architecture, not advanced architecture, just basic thoughts around architecture to be more important. And I think I would have been better off had I realized things like, oh, it's okay to have 10 components on one object, like it's not a problem at all.
You don't have to have them all in one big script and one big update loop.
Yeah, exactly. So I like it better though. I mean, obviously making games is more fun, but I feel like at least with Unity, and I don't know if this is the same with everything else, but there is a lot of structure to it that you don't necessarily see it right off the bat, but there is a lot of structure which I find makes it more easy to grasp once you start understanding the structure.
I will say on that note, just my personal thing is I'm a tool developer at heart. I understand there's the fun side of games and there's a lot more satisfaction to have the feedback. And I've done the rounds. I've done used to build enterprise stuff where, you wouldn't get any feedback and it would feel depressing. You'd spend ages and no one would even like nod at the fact that you just spent 2 weeks trying to make their life better. And so there is that feedback with games. But on a personal level, I prefer that enterprise style stuff mostly. And even in games, I try to isolate things and treat it like little snippets of enterprise code. Like my favorite part of a game project is writing the file loaders or writing the web APIs or doing the stuff that intersects with that, because that is the place where some of those enterprise patterns and practices apply. And while I like the other end of games, the complete other end of the spectrum, where you're doing game balancing and level design and all of that, the middle tier, which is where most programmers live in Unity, which is programming the inventory and the character controllers and the collision detections and all that stuff, it's so exhausting for me because you don't have to be a genius at maths and physics to do it. Like I'm terrible at both of those, but I can get by. But I won't deny that you have to. The hard part is you have to phrase your question. So if you're like, I want this code to fire an arrow, to like rotate around a planet, you have to go, okay, what am I asking? And how do I turn that into a code question? And how do I find the answer to my question in the form of code? And then you're stuck in that case of trying different ATAN2s and matrix math, and you're just hoping to get the right thing to do what you want. And I miss the clarity of where I came from, which is I have a problem. I go to Pluralsight and someone's given me a 6-hour course that explains it in vivid detail, and I can apply it and know I'm doing my job correctly, which you don't get with games. So there's a level of clarity that I quite enjoyed with the enterprise stuff.
Well, that makes sense. I think, again, those problems are, a lot of the time, they're very well defined too. That makes it easier. It's like, you know exactly what it is you're doing. You're solving a problem that's probably been solved a bunch of times before, unless you're one of these amazing startups that very few people are doing. Most people are just resolving problems for another industry. They're doing the same thing. So next question was about popsicles. How many would you have to be offered to participate in a bank robbery? I've been thinking about this question for a while now.
Months.
It's got to be a really large number if you think about it, because popsicles, even if you were able to bulk resell them all, like
they'd melt.
How much? Yeah, like they're gonna melt. You've got to be able to store them. I don't know.
Not just any warehouse. It has to have cold storage, and then cold transport trucks.
You got to have a buyer. I mean, it would have to be a lot. Right? I think we're talking in the billions.
Yeah, and by the time you get these popsicles, would it be wintertime?
Or do I have a buyer? Can I sell them to the grocery store? Because if not, like, what am I going to do with popsicles? Get like four.
Well, in my case, something like a bank robbery. It's exciting the first time you do it, but after that, it loses its no real point doing it again.
Yeah.
Never again. All right, so let's go on to the next one then. When in your game dev journey should you move away from visual scripting and learn code? I think the second that you decide that you want to actually be programming. If you decide that you don't want to just do design and do some visual scripting stuff to help with that, which is totally valid for game designers. They shouldn't necessarily learn to code. But if you actually want to do programming, the second that you decide that you want to like be a game developer, programmer side of it, you should start learning code right away. Or jump into it like as early as possible. 10 years old.
I'm very militant with this one, which is I say this all the time. I think if you are proficient with a visual scripting tool to the point that you're building semi-complicated things with raycasts and selections and custom collisions, spoiler alert, you're already a programmer. The hard part of programming is the logic. It is not the syntax. And it looks scarier, don't get me wrong. It's like switching to a different operating system that you've never used before. But like, if you've used an operating system, you know what folders are, you know what files are, you know how, you may not know the exact extension this particular OS uses to launch an application, but all of this scariness is entirely superficial. And so from my perspective, I think as soon as you're capable at the visual scripting language you're using, then just it's purely psychological. You just have to get over that hump of being afraid of the keywords. But honestly, once you actually get over that and go, oh, rather than 2 nodes, it's the word if, and rather than a add node, it's just plus equals. Like you start to really see that they're exactly the same.
I would also expect that visual scripting becomes more efficient and powerful once you know actual scripting, because you can find where that makes sense to use, and you can choose when it makes sense to not use visual scripting.
Yeah. I think it's great for it's great to visualize flow. I think that's the most valuable use case for it, is when you've got something that's moving through states like an AI or a global application state. Where am I? Am I on the cutscene? Am I in a level or whatever? Having some global state management that you can track is really valuable. But like the bit for me, the sign of it being a waste of time, in my opinion, is the difference between someone writing a node which says, add to inventory or search for enemy, as opposed to someone writing 50 nodes that say vector add, vector remove, raycast check. And it's like, all of this could be 5 lines of code turned into a node and then place the node in the visual graph, and you could be using that instead. When you're doing things like vector math in a visual scripting tool, it's not what it's there for. Like it can do it, but realistically, it's silly to write 10 or 12 nodes to do that. There's a different story if you're doing something like shader work, because the point of that is it is a visual process from start to finish. And so you want a non-destructive workflow, which shows a texture with multiplications, a texture after multiplications. If you're writing code, it's not that valuable for you to see score was 5, I added 1, score was 6. That's not the same thing, right? You're not getting that same feedback from it. So I'm not a fan of using it for anything other than like workflow level stuff, you know.
Yeah, I'm always just a fan of using it for designers, letting game designers use visual scripting to improve stuff or to do the things that they want to do for the game. So, all right, I did open up the giveaway battler, by the way. It looks like people are starting to join now. I'm not sure why the camera stopped focusing, but I'll let it get back to it in a minute. We have 1.5 million questions, though, so I'm going to jump over to the next one. How do I pitch my game to publishers? I'm having a hard time recently. I am not the right one to ask for that. I've never pitched a game to publishers, and I hate pitching things. So, you guys have any tips on this, or just
I've never pitched to publishers.
I've been in the room for pitches, but they weren't mine. I know people who have done pitches, but it's not been my stuff. I will say though, the 2 resources I'd go to is 1, watch the talk that we always bring up. It's the 30 things I hate about your pitch, which will guide you over the very obvious pitfalls where every single person, and I guarantee you've done this if you're pitching your first game, will sit there and start writing the novel of their story, of the lore of their game, and you will lose half the room and no one will care. So there's a bunch of very obvious pitfalls they're not even just things you shouldn't do. Here's a bit of a spoiler for a lot of people out there. If you're ever in a position of hiring of any kind, or financing, or any position where someone is pitching to you, whether it's themselves or for a job, only half of it's about the content. The other half is about the experience. There are things that a person does which exudes a level of experience. Some of it is like, oh, they're a beginner. Just from the sheer decisions they make on how they do the pitch, how they phrase things, how they carry themselves. And honestly, stuff like that disqualifies you immediately. If I was sitting there and I had money in my back pocket and someone comes up and is like, hi, I've got a game, I want to do this, and they approach the pitch like an excited person on a subreddit, then we're not getting past that first stage, because it means they haven't taken the time to go away and like read up on it, learn it, and make a pitch that's at a professional level. Because at the end of the day, they're not your friend. You're asking them for money, and so they want to give money to a professional. And so honestly, a lot of the fundamentals are, you could fail out the gate just by the sheer approach you take if you don't look like you are taking it seriously. So that's a lot of it. And then the second half is you have to make sure you make the right pitch to the right people. So I've seen a lot of scenarios where people will just, I think it was, I can't remember who said it exactly, but they said if you're pitching an FPS to a mobile game company, of course, like, you're wasting your time. Like, nobody there. It's so understanding who you're pitching to is very important. If you want more specifics than that, go look at Thomas Brush's channel. He's got like 15 different videos over the course of the last 2 years where he talks about his journey. He's one of the few people with a very proven track record of pitching. He's worked with like 3 or 4 different publishers. He's pitched multiple times. He's released on multiple platforms. His course, whether you want to buy a course or not, it's fine. But to be fair, he knows his stuff on that topic, and I've taken the course, and he will outline his strategy for approaching that and lists of studios he recommends and things. So depends on how you want to go about that. But yeah, step 1, watch that GDC. I think it's GDC, or is it Unite? Either way, the pitch, things I hate about your pitch talk. Check out Thomas Brush's channel, and then realistically look for documentation on it. Like, it's not something we can give you a nice friendly statement. You're going to have to learn how to make a good pitch.
That's good advice. Yeah, I would go to someone like Thomas too, somebody who's got a lot of experience doing it. Not me. I can make the code, but I don't like selling the games. All right. Which game programming technology do you think will thrive in the future? What is it? Is there anything specific that stands out? I mean, I think that AI stuff will probably get bigger in the future. Some machine learning stuff for game control and game AI, and maybe even for generation stuff. But outside of that, I got nothing. I mean, you got any
I
ideas?
think the biggest one is going to be the image upraising and sharpening stuff. Like right now, you can take a blocky world of Minecraft and run it through an AI generator and get back a lush 3D environment. We're at the point now where there will be like overlay shader effects, which will fundamentally like be the graphics, not just a slight difference of effect. They'll be completely changing the game. So I imagine that's a big deal. One thing I do want to point out, though, it's been brought up in the chat. It seems to be that they meant specifically an elevator pitch, not like a full financing pitch. If you're talking elevator pitch, it's a lot simpler. There's a lot of there's a running joke that people say it's a bad idea to say, oh, my game is X, but like Y, or, it's Thomas was alone, but you play as a donkey. Like as silly as that sounds as a pitch, you know immediately what people talk about. You just have to make sure that you're using a frame of reference that they understand. So in general, if you're looking for an elevator pitch, you need to very succinctly get across basically what it is, how they can reference what you're talking about, and then what makes it unique. So that's it. If you want an elevator pitch, it is blank with blank. So they're like, okay, so you're saying it's going to be a roguelike, open-ish, give them something to hook a story on their head, and then say, but here's my unique hook as to why you care. So simple as that. Every elevator pitch is the same thing. It's this, but here's the catch.
So, Andrew, the next one was for you. It's not really a question. It says, Andrew, I bought the recent Humble Bundle and must say your assets are beautiful. And I agree. So I figured I would pop up the bundle real quick. If you haven't checked it out, there's a link down in the description below. But it's got Andrew's beautiful dragons, a bunch of the characters, a bunch of weapons, armor, and some courses. So anything else you want to say about that, Andrew?
I am humbly humbled by such compliments.
Are you bundled as well? Is that?
No, it's actually kind of chilly this morning too, and so I'm not humbly bundled. Humbly bumbly. Yeah, can't say the words.
All right, so here's another one. How do you deal with overwhelming game projects? So say your project is seemingly too big, like you're never gonna finish it. Get that sense. I've had that before. I'm sure lots of people have, where you're like,
yep,
this is never going to be done. I may as well just give up. What do I do? Like, what do you guys think? What are your go-to thoughts on that?
It's like climbing a mountain, 1 foot in front of the other. Take that next step. Small.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed with your game, Andrew?
All the damn time.
I think that's the wrong question. It's like, do you ever have a free moment where you don't constantly feel overwhelmed? I think is a better.
I think the big thing that happens for me, at least, is when I run into problems that take longer to solve than they should. Especially when, like, the last thing that I was working on, it's been a few weeks since I've been able to touch the game, but the last thing I was working on was nav mesh agent stuff, and I never really liked nav mesh agent stuff. I know it works. I know I've gotten it to work in this way before. I just can't remember how. And I know it's such a simple problem, yet I can't solve it. And that's the stuff that makes me the most frustrated and causes the most strife, I suppose. But even with that, the trick then is to take a step back, maybe work on something else for a while, work on things that you can finish, let your brain process, calm down from all the frustration, and then take another stab at it, and just bite-sized chunks of... Yeah, exactly. Bite-sized chunks of stuff you can do, get those done one step at a time.
That's good advice. Knock it all out. So this one is aimed at me, but I want you to answer it too, Jason. So it says, you mentioned you were in VR development years ago and then stopped for a few years. I'm wondering why, as I'm getting into VR now myself, would you recommend VR game development? So yeah, I did a bunch of VR stuff. Right when the Rift came out, when the first Oculus came out, I got a hold of one, and the second one I was obsessed. And then when the Vive came out, I actually released a couple games for it. It was like 6 games. I've got a stack of VR headsets, but I don't use them that often. And it was largely, I think it was mostly just me getting burnt out. Like I did VR stuff so much for so long that I just got tired of wearing a headset, and like the excitement kind of started to fade. That said, VR development's still relatively good to get into. It's hard to do like giant mass sales, like something that's huge, at least from what I can tell still. But there's a ridiculous amount of work out there in the VR industry for applications and games and stuff. So if you're interested in it, I would definitely do it. The only reason I stopped again was just because I did it for so long that I just kind of got tired of it. What about you though, Jason? Because you've got more headsets than anybody else.
I was going to say, I have one within range right here. It's the only one I still work on. It's the Quest 2 or Meta Quest or whatever the hell they've called it these days. That's the only one that I still get actual dev time on. The rest of them, I even have a Vive Pro in a box somewhere that there's no real point setting up anymore. Yeah, for me it was very much just feeling like I was being strung along by a narrative. Like, there's a point in your life where you really enjoy getting in on the ground floor on new bleeding edge tech, and that's what I was doing. I had the early headsets back when no one else did. I was riding the wave, and I was like calling the shots on what was going to happen. I remember telling people about this stuff, and they're like, it sounds like a fun toy. And then they start hearing about it when other bigger companies are getting involved. I said, I told you, I've been keep letting you know this is happening for years. I did a podcast about VR for a year and a half. I went to all of the trade shows. I knew a lot of the early people who are now bigger and far richer than I am. For me, it was just a case of the running joke was there was a phrase called "This is the year of VR," and the idea was for all of us who were early in the adopting, it's like someday it'll kick off. Everyone else will see what we're seeing in this technology. And in the first days, when it was the original Rift, there was they called it the screen door effect. It was literally the screens were so low resolution, you could see the pixels, like visibly see the pixels. And they were so big, it looked like you were standing between one of those giant mesh doors held up to your face because you can see every single line like a grid. And understandably, it wasn't taking off for people at that stage. There was not even head tracking. It was a whole pile of stuff. But anyway, there was that classic, oh no, this next coming year is going to be the year of VR. And the next year, the year of VR. And the next year, no, this is the year of VR. Even after Facebook bought it, and then even after it started to get bigger, even though now we've got a Half-Life game released on it. These are all like big dramatic moments, but it's still like the problem I had to keep wrestling with is, pragmatically speaking, VR is very cool. It's a unique experience. If you never tried it, it's one of a kind, but it is still a massive disconnect between playing games and doing VR, because the underlying thing that people don't realize is, just like with we called it the Minority Report effect. If you want to play games, you're probably chilling out. That's what you're mostly doing. And the VR is a immersive experience, which at a minimum, lowest level, requires you to start wearing things, start strapping on a bunch of equipment. That's the lowest level. After that, you start getting into proper room space stuff where you have vests and you've got tracking markers in the walls, and now you're doing full body stuff, and it's cooler that way. But like, so few people are want to sit there on the couch. Like, even in the early days, this was a problem with the Kinect. Like, some of the early technologies that tried to get you to move around, like all the jokes about the Wii where people would sit on their couch and just waggle the controllers, and like they're not doing the things that you're meant to do. So there's a huge disconnect between the way VR promises and what you get. Like, it has to provide something so good it gets you off your ass to go do the thing that's effort filled, you know? And so I always thought the real kicker for VR wasn't going to be these things. They were going to be what's called the out-of-home entertainment industry, which is a fancy way of saying arcades. Because even though, for those of you who don't go to arcades because they're not really a thing anymore, they used to be a huge, huge deal. It used to be one of the only places you could really go for entertainment. And so I thought this would really reinvigorate that idea, that there'd be a lot more of these giant event locations where they'd be like a $80,000 VR rig, and then you'd go and rent it for a party like a bowling alley or something. But yeah, but the point is, it didn't really do what it was supposed to do, in my perspective. I still work on it, but the difference is I now work on client projects. It is now a disruptive technology that's really good for marketing. There's a whole pile of projects I work on which are either for like interesting ways to market things in AR or VR, or to demonstrate something in a space which you can't do normally. For example, if you are doing architectural stuff and you want to give a sense of how big a room is, it's really great for that. if you want to have a product simulation, you can literally create a 3D product and like show the size, shape, dimensions. A lot of companies use it for practical reasons to kind of bridge that gap with clients. But as a gaming experience, I just don't think it's offers enough to warrant the cost of entry, both in terms of physical hardware and investment of physical effort that people would have to have, you know?
Yeah. I think.
Oh, and one other thing too, lowest common denominator stuff too. That's the other side note. When you first started, there was infinite possibilities. There was a million prototypes, but it all devolves down to basic first-person shooters, and that started to lose my interest very quickly. When there's like 4 kinds of games, and half of them are like, I love rhythm games, I love first-person shooters, but when 50% of the high-quality library is rhythm-based shooters, you're like, okay, there's, you know.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, all 3 of us were at the the Oculus convention way back in the day. We just didn't know each other then.
We never met.
I remember, you know, at the time I was interested in VR movies and films in VR and the promise that could have. But I do remember being very frustrated with folks I was working with on various projects where they wanted to make it as essentially more like a game where the viewer would start sitting turning straight ahead, but then they were like, but then they're going to hear the sound behind them, and then they're going to turn their head all the way back here and see this monster. Of course, people don't do that. People hear the sound and they're like, okay, I hear a sound, and then all of a sudden this thing walks over, and they're like, what the hell was that? You know, because they missed it, and there was no way. You know, people talking about, well, now you have to wait, just hold a trigger until they turn, and once they turn, that triggers the animation. And I'm like, but same deal as Jason, as you said, if I'm watching a movie, I want to sit on my couch. I don't mind moving my head a little bit like this. You know, we got big screens, and you're in the theater, you're certainly moving your head a little bit like that, but that's the extent of it. You don't want to have to go crazy. In fact, behind you should just be black. You shouldn't even have anything back there. Don't even give people a reason to look back. And the other thing, of course, is I love movies in the theater with popcorn and a Coke. And I'm not going to be sitting there next to my friend with the full VR headset on, especially if they've got their bag next to them and they're worried that somebody's going to steal their bag while they can't see a damn thing. And you try to go up and go to the bathroom. It's such a pain in the ass. So the only way that movies would really work in VR that aren't just a solo choose your own adventure game, essentially, would be if technology changes so that you can go to the movie theater, throw on glasses, and see VR in some pane or plane in front of you. That it's like a window. You're in a room and there's a window and there's a whole world outside of that window, but you can still get your popcorn, you can still get your Coke, you can still see people coming in and out of the theater and all that. So you're still part of that community environment, but now the movie is more engaging than it would have been, I suppose.
Fair. It reminded me of a couple days ago, I went and saw with my kids, took them to see Thor on one of these screens accidentally. These Screen X ones. I don't know if you've seen these. It does not look like that. That is not accurate. It's so I thought it was the seats that move because I was going to see Thor and I figured it might be cool if it was flying around. But I got this one instead accidentally. And what they do is on the edge of or on the sides, the whole wall, it's projected. They have like projectors down in the corners, but all they're doing is taking, it looks like maybe like the 10% on the edges and stretching and blurring that out along the entire wall. So it's really weird. It's a neat effect in like, 2 or 3 situations, like you're flying through space or something, like it makes sense or whatever. But overall, it was it just seemed kind of like it didn't make a lot of sense. Didn't add a lot to the movie experience, kind of like you're saying. And it made it sad.
That's a problem with all of this stuff, is that the truth is a lot of this, as someone in the chat said, they're solutions looking for problems, right? Is that like 3D is cool. The whole 4D blowing water or blowing air at your feet to simulate things is cool. Like all of these things are cool, but they're distractions. There's in VR especially, there's a concept called presence. And it basically means that if you put on a headset in a 3D environment, there's an immediate wow factor just from the sheer scale of things. You could literally have an empty Unity environment and put a large cube and go, whoa, that cube looks like it's 6 feet tall. And it's like, the thing is, people hide behind that. and they stop making anything else interesting because you've succeeded already. And that's why there was a whole lot of prototypes of people standing on the edge of a building, a rooftop or something, because it's like, oh, you're looking down, it's scary. It's like, yeah, but you still need a game. There still needs to be something happening. You're understanding here. And so the problem with a lot of this technology is it gets people to create interesting things, but then it never goes anywhere, because it's like, for all the other stuff, you got to give credit to Nintendo for the fact that when they do gimmicks, and they are gimmicks with like various different waggly controllers or the horrible Wii U incident, they at least lean in and try to show use cases of the technologies they're doing. Like, they don't just release it out to you and say, okay, good luck, I hope it's fun. Because the problem with things like VR is you have to release it and then hope developers do the fun things. A lot of things like Nintendo will go ahead and they'll like make the games first, or they'll go to developers and have in-house stuff. So when they release, you'll get that free disc that's got 20 different interesting uses of it. PlayStation did this. Sony did the same thing when they brought out the Rumble controller with all of the weird, gesture trigger controllers. They brought out the Astro demo, and you got a very clear understanding of not only what it's doing, but why it might be beneficial to gaming. So I was like, oh, this is good. I want all my controllers to now have these controllers, these analog sticks, because there's value. I can see it. But with stuff like VR, again, it's hardware that comes out, and we're just hoping somebody makes the game that sells us on why. There's a lot of presence-related stuff in Half-Life Alyx that I think has culminated. And what bothers me is a lot of people are like, oh my God, Alyx has solved it. They figured out a bunch of... No, they haven't solved it. They've been watching 8 years of people on Reddit coming up with experiments. They've refined it. They're better at it than a lot of random indies online. But they didn't invent that hook grabbing thing. They didn't invent the move teleport the way you're doing it. None of those things were invented by Valve. They were just refined in a better way. But yeah, so you're just waiting for somebody to make the killer app, the thing that sells everybody on why. And all of these technologies, to me, I used to love them from a experiential being on the edge perspective. Now I just want things to work and be easy and provide value. And the truth is, so few of these things do. A lot of them just feel like a lot of money and resources and effort for stuff that ends up being a pain in the ass.
Yep.
All right, away from VR stuff, what about working on brands and being an indie dev? The question said, is it important to work on your image and brand before turning into an indie dev? I would say no. Definitely not. I think it's beneficial when you want to actually release your game, but yeah. I mean, I would say it's important, but not before. I think the word before is the part I would cut out.
Yeah, if I think, yes, if you are saying I can't build this game yet, I need my logo, then you're doing it wrong.
Or I need a YouTube channel and subscribers before I can start. Yeah.
That said, there's nothing wrong with having a logo that you think is really cool. Maybe it's from an old project that you did within a completely different thing and you just want to keep it around, or you have an LLC or something that you just already have and it's related enough that you can pivot into game development. That's fine. But I don't think you need to having an image and brand kind of implies that you are an indie dev. Like, you know what I mean? I suppose you wouldn't buy a cape to be a magician. You wouldn't start by buying a cape and a top hat,
You might,
but if those don't have some tricks built into them, then you're just dressing up.
As somebody who spent about 4 years being a pseudo-professional magician, I take great offense to that particular characterization. Thank you very much. I used to do corporate magic, and I did not wear a cape or a fancy hat.
Well, how would you know you're a magician then?
Where'd you hide your rabbit?
Yeah.
No rabbits either. No live animals. That's not.
How long was your wand?
I thought you were a magician. My kids would have to reject you. They're like, you're not a magician. You don't even have a wand.
Yeah, or a cape.
I used to go by the fancy term cardistry, because that's what the real magicians do. It's where they do fancy card stuff, as opposed to like the gimmicky the gaffs and the various other stuff. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. I would say my opinion on this has changed slightly, because I'm bringing up Thomas Berserker again because it's very relevant to what we're talking about. I think it was a year and a half ago, so 2 years ago. It was Christmas, and I had thrown out my back. I had sciatica. I was basically unable to move, lying on a couch, physically I was horizontal and couldn't move. Literally any kind of movement, I was in agony. And so I had nothing to do except watch online courses. So I was watching a lot of online courses. And at the time, I was watching Thomas Brush's course. And specifically, one thing that really impressed me is he opens the first 3 or 4 videos that starts the course by saying, follow along with what I'm doing. And he goes and goes to Photoshop and makes a very quick logo, slaps a game name, starts registering the Twitter account, all the stuff, just like sets it up. And at first I was like, because it comes down to that question, is like, do you do branding or do you do your game first? And I realized a lot of people, and I've said this before in other ways, people look at games as like a LARPing fun thing. It's like, oh, I'll make a game. I'll just sort of noodle around and poke at it a bit. And they don't take it seriously. And there's something very edifying about actually going, no, this is a business. I'm going to start by going, it is a brand. It has a name. I have to market it and I have to treat it seriously. And so even though on the face of it, I think that question feels like a silly one, it feels like of course, make a game before you try to market it. I think there's something to be said for treating it like a product, because if you do that to start with, you're more likely to engage with it in a serious way. And so I think there's something to be said for that. And I do think there's a point where you're wasting your time. You should do the minimum requirement. You should like do some screenshots, put some stuff up there and whatever. And this leans in well with some really good advice people have said about if you're trying to put your game on Steam, the coin of the realm on Steam is the wish list. The wish list, collection of wish lists, is your magic gateway to making money. It doesn't translate 1-to-1, but I think it's like 1 out of every 100 or 1,000 or whatever, you're going to get your sales based on that. So it's a really good metric for, is it worth going down this road? And so you have to go down this. The way you get wish lists, though, is email addresses. So the chain of events goes, I need email addresses, I need to get wish lists, and then kind of go down that right from there. And so the longer you're acquiring email addresses, the better resources you're going to have at the time it goes to sell your game. So there's a lot to be said as far as research goes in terms of starting early, treating it like a product, and building that brand around it. Now, like I said, I agree with everyone else here in that don't waste your time on it. If you're like making email blasts and writing blog entries, but you haven't actually made your game, you've got a problem. So I would say get started, come up with a name, come up with a quick image, do a brand thing, whatever, put it out there, and then get back to work. And now you at least have a place where every week when you've got a new update, you can post an image on a Discord or on a Twitter account and start building that brand, and people can follow along with you. And it should be no more engaged than that. It should just be a place to keep people engaged in what you're doing. So make it, but don't live there.
Yeah, I can stand behind that. I always worry about people that I've seen it happen a lot, who just do that, and they spend their entire time getting ready to do the thing that they want to do and never actually start doing the thing that they want to do. Like spend the entire time buying equipment and getting prepared to record videos and setting things up, but never recording a video, that kind of stuff. So just make sure that you're doing it quick. I like the idea of, like you said, in Thomas's course, though, we're just going to follow along, go through the steps, and then you're done. And so you're not thinking about like, what do I do next? And then putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, just going through, knocking out all of the parts right away. Yeah, that works. But as for becoming an indie dev, I would say like, you definitely don't necessarily have to have your own brand and big thing before you do that. Do it for your game, get it ready, and then build that up while you're doing your development stuff. This is probably just going to be a quick yes or no, but anyone use UniRX or Unitask? Do you guys use either one of these?
I have. I'm not a fan though. Like I don't hate them, but I just that's a very good example to me of using a square peg in a round hole. It just like UniRX and reactive extensions, they work really well for consuming web services and transforming data. So the best example I ever saw was somebody taking a list of users from one place, then connecting to a Twitter API, transforming the data to a new data model structure, getting a collection of users with their Twitter information and last tweet, and then piping that through and then creating a UI which would then render a user and their last tweet. It's a perfect candidate for a nice stream of data structured and formatted through, which works well for an event-driven asynchronous web type scenario. But this whole idea of turning button presses into streams of data and events and stuff, it just seems so silly when like a game engine is literally an update loop. You have an update loop. You don't need to be abstracting out the concept of an update loop to a stream of input. It's yeah. I don't hate it. It's just I think if you're using it, you're actively abstracting things away in a direction that doesn't add value, in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I find that a lot of the time, and I hate to say it, but a lot of the time when I get example code from enterprise sources, they're always like overly abstracted like that. They've got the same abstractions that you would expect to see by default in a web app built into their Unity stuff in these layers that make it a lot more complicated to figure out what it's doing and kill performance for really no benefit, because you're never going to use those abstractions beyond what they've got there. It's like for an SDK or something, you know. So, and here's one I've never heard of this. Do you guys have opinions on the Stride game engine? I've never heard of it, so I don't have any. No, but I'll have to check it out, see what it is. All right. So when in, we already answered that one. I popped it up again. Okay, here's another one. What do you think about scriptable events? Do you use them in your projects, and why not? I like the answer at the end. Why not? No. I think that they're neat. There can be some uses with game design stuff. I don't generally use them myself because I'm not usually exposing things that I want game designers to use in that way. If I was working with a giant team of game designers and that was a good flow for them, I would consider having some scriptable events set up for things that made sense. But in general, I find that I prefer my code to be in code so that I can dig through. I'm much faster looking at actual code than clicking through objects and looking at object references and stuff. So I just don't generally prefer it unless I'm working with designers who I need to give lots of flexibility to, and that's the easiest way. What about you guys? You ever use scriptable events?
No, I don't use them out of spite. I hate them. No, the truth is, I'm so sick of it's one of those things where it feels like in every field of study, there's like the inevitable journey everyone takes. If you learn enterprise software, you start out by writing giant monolithic classes. Then you learn about design patterns, and you go, "Oh, this is great!" And then suddenly you start making a million different stupid, messy code things. It's like it's the rite of passage you have to take. If you're in Unity and you start talking about architecture, you inevitably will find the Ryan Hipple talk, and you'll start going, "This is it! This is amazing!" And everyone starts using it. You'll make your entire application out of scriptable events. It'll be great in a nice, small, condensed project. And all of a sudden, it'll stop working properly, and it'll be like, "This is frustrating. I'm having trouble debugging it," and it'll be a pain in the ass. Because what it does, it drives me insane, because whenever I get questions like this, it comes down to people are looking at the shape of the thing and just trying to like, "Oh, I'll just put it in my project and hope it works." But take a step back and like evaluate what it's doing. All of these things, all the architectural patterns, all of these solutions are solutions to problems. They offer some advantages, they offer some disadvantages. And if you don't need to go the full rabbit hole to kind of sit and think, what might this do for me? And the biggest consequence of a scriptable based event system is that the events live outside of your project. The good part of that is that when you have an event, you can fire it from anywhere. It is a physical object, you can hook up to anything. That's great. The bad part of that is there is no line of code in your entire application which says, if this occurs, do this thing. You have completely removed the ability to write what's called your use cases or your business rules into your application, which means in any scenario where you're trying to figure out, when I press this button and then that character dies and the score is updated and then this occurs and I spawn a new wave, if you want to change that life cycle, there's nowhere in your code base, which is a line of code that says, if this occurs, do this, then this, then this. It is all transitively built up out of a relationship of vague object connections, which means it's impossible to debug, it's impossible to figure out where things are going wrong. And if you want to change it, you have to know where the hierarchy of events are happening. It is a really bad idea to treat it that way. Now, does that mean it's a bad tool? No, it's a perfectly valid tool for one type of scenario, which is decoupling the kinds of events which may need to be fired separate from the application. So there's something called a signal pattern, and that certain kinds of events make sense. For example, you might have UI-based events like go back a tab page or close a certain window or pause game or something that you might want to be able to fire from any scenario where the game would pause if controller disconnected or if something else. Those kinds of events make perfect sense to have some kind of object event that works for that kind of scenario. The problem is people look at a scriptable event-based architecture and go, oh, I will replace every event in my application with this architecture now. This is it. I'm using this architecture. They are tools. Some of them are good for certain problems. Use the right tools for the right problems. So if you see any one of these solutions and then try to all in on it, you're just asking for trouble. Like that, the point is it won't solve every problem. So just take a step back and apply it critically to the problems you have and use it when it helps. Don't use it when it doesn't.
All right, Andrew, I got a question I wanted to pop up for you. Oh, that's not it. It was this one right here. You've got some assets on the asset store. The question was, what type of assets are most profitable on the asset store? Do you know, is there anything released about that, or have you heard anything?
I don't think there's anything released, but I think you can look at when you're browsing and you can see what's popular on any given sale or non-sale time frame. Tools are most popular, and then like I talk about this with 3D models all the time. Environments are more popular than humans. Humans are more popular than mushroom monsters. And if you think about it from a game dev journey and really the scope of the audience, anything that has a broader appeal to more people is going to sell more often. So looking at 3D models, a lot more people will need a forest than will need a medieval town or a dungeon. But a lot more people will need a dungeon or a medieval town than will need perhaps a human or a dragon. And a lot more people will need a human or a dragon than a mushroom monster. And so, at each level of the breadth of that audience, you're cutting down on your potential revenue. Because in the end, it's a limited pool of users. You can do work on YouTube, you can do SEO, you can increase your audience, and you should as a publisher on the asset store. But in the end, there's a total addressable market of X, and most of those people in that market, all game developers, don't want what you're selling. That's just the way it is. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just the way it is. And so you really, if you're looking to make the most money possible, then you should make something that every single one of those people could technically use if they so chose. So something like Playmaker, completely agnostic to what people are working on. They're working on a game, non-game application, fantasy, sci-fi, first-person shooter, 2D, you can use Playmaker. So it's going to be more popular. But when you come to something more specific, like there's a really cool 2D Shadows asset out there. I forget the name of it. Maybe it's called 2D Shadows. 2D lighting or something like that. Oh, there it is, right? You found it. That's the one. That's a really cool asset. I will never use it. I'm not making 2D games. So I'm never going to use it. Even though I think it's stellar and cool and it looks really neat. And every time I see this video and even just the thumbnail and the icon, I think, oh, that's really cool. I kind of want to make a 2D game now, but I'm not going to. So I'm never going to use this asset. And that's fine. So I think
it does apply to everybody who's making a 2D game almost, right?
But it will apply to almost everybody making a 2D game. Yeah. And so that's what it comes down to is looking at, if you're trying to make money based on your asset, if that's your goal, your first goal, then you're going to look at the audience and imagine, can anybody use this, or am I limiting the audience based on the content?
Yeah, I think looking at these by popularity too helps a lot. Like the category sort by popularity, you can see what's popular and probably look at the back end and see what's not popular, the kinds of things that don't sell very well. Like I can totally see what you're saying though, because like very specific things, like there are a lot less people that want a Medusa than a dragon, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, it's very specific type of thing. Dragon, any kind of game can have a dragon.
Like, and the thing is, like, a lot of this stuff, I don't want to say it's intuitive, but put yourself in the shoes of yourself when you first learned Unity. It's like, oh, I want to make a game for the first time. The first thing you're going to probably think of is space first-person shooter or real-time strategy. Whatever game you play, you're going to go, I want to make that one. And so the very first thing you're going to do is search for the assets directly related to what you're doing. So what is the first thing a lot of people want to make? First-person shooter. What's probably going to sell really well? Probably some guns. Probably something to shoot those guns at. Probably some environment to walk around in and shoot those guns at. What kind of environments? Something that'll look good. What'll look good generically without too much work? Probably something spaceshipy, because that tends to be very clean surfaces that are easy to set up, easy to modularize, don't require a lot of work. So a lot of this stuff you can kind of reason about just from how people will intend to use the tools. And it comes down to making things that are valuable to the maximum amount of people, like Andrew's saying. So
yeah, I would also surmise that perhaps people don't buy everything they need all at once. It's not like, if you know you're building a deck in your backyard, you go to the hardware store and you buy all the things you need to build that deck, because you don't want to go back and forth to the store. When you're making a game, let's say I want to make a space shooter game, what's the first thing you buy? Do you buy everything all at once? Do you say, okay, well, I'm going to need music, I'm going to need sound, I'm going to need UI, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need that, I'm going to need 5 enemies at least, so I'm going to buy 6 just to be sure, though. We need an extra one just to be sure. And then put them all in one cart, and then make one epic purchase, and then load up Unity and say, all right, what's the first thing? No, you build that first thing, and then you say...
Get the environment first.
Yeah, you put the environment up. Then you're, okay, and move around. Okay, maybe I need a movement script because I want to deal with the first-person movement. So you buy first-person movement script. Then you're like, okay, what do I need now? A gun. How many guns do you need? Just one. Maybe you get a pack of guns because that seems like a good deal, but you're not going to go out and buy every gun your game is going to need once it's published on Steam. Same thing with the enemies. The first enemy you buy is not going to be the mushroom monster, most likely. I always like to bring up the mushroom monster. It's one of my favorites to bring up, but it's going to be something more mainstream.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a goblin. It's going to be a dragon. It's going to be something that's much more mainstream and common. It might just be another human because you already bought that human for your player character. Just throw the human and now it's a human enemy. Boom, done. You don't even have to buy another one. And that's what's going to happen. And I think from an art publisher perspective, the real magic happens for sales and customers really supporting you with a lot of purchases is when that customer is now making their game and they feel confident that they're going to actually get their game to that next level. And now they need 10 different enemies. Now they need 20 different enemies, and they need sound effects, and they need particle effects, and they're actually making headway. And that takes a while to get there.
Yeah, and then for the other side of the coin, for coding-based assets or scripting assets, there is really 3 kinds of developers. That's it, realistically. There is, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm making my first ever thing, and if I want to have footstep sounds and you have a thing that gives me footstep sounds, I'll press the button, I'll buy it, I'll put it in my game, and I'll be happy. It better be easy to use. Then there is the seasoned programmer who realistically, they're not going to buy your stuff if they feel like they can make it themselves. And I see an awful lot of people making visual tools or rule engines or systems, big complicated systems to handle things, when a lot of devs will look at it and go, why would I use their thing? I'll just write my own. It's such a weird market of like would you use someone else's random thing that kind of half solves what you want? But then there's the third category of people who are realistically just trying to get something done. They could make it themselves, but there's a pragmatic relationship between their time, their money, and what they're making, and they will buy something to solve a problem. And so I think the biggest mistake people make is just not picturing that perfect audience member for what they're doing. Someone like me does a lot of client projects, and I am not going to build 500 bespoke systems for every client project that I need. If there is something that does something I need, I will buy it, I will use it, it'll do the job. If it doesn't do what I want, or the system looks complicated enough, shout out to that bloody chart system I bought for a project and then had to not use because it was too messy and complicated for what I basically needed. I ended up writing my own. And so it just comes down to, what are you aiming for? And realistically, most people will be, I don't know how to do a custom nav mesh AI thing, or I don't know how to set up a grass system that does what I want, or some fancy raycast selector. And so providing you can make it easy enough, you'll get a lot of sales from people who just want a solution to a problem. But as soon as you get to that next level of complexity, it had better be so complex that the person is questioning whether they make it themselves or not. That little middle ground is such a weird place that you're not likely to get sales on.
Yeah. I think I just lost it. I had it in my head and then it went away. It was based exactly on what you were talking about just now. There's a mushroom monster. The complexity issue. Yeah, I think that's where why somebody asked another question earlier about the game modules. I think something around like when do you use them and when do you just make your own system? Is a great question because the reality is I made the game modules bundle after looking at RPG frameworks on the asset store and deciding that all of them were good, but were very opinionated in what you did and how they operate. And if you didn't want to make that type of RPG game, there would be a lot of work in order to make both use of that framework plus your own game. And so what I decided to do was create a system that doesn't force you to use it, first of all, so you can choose to use parts or not parts, so you can, there. It doesn't do all the look and feel aspect, except for the inventory, which if you don't want that inventory, then just don't use it. But it gives you a system to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So you don't necessarily have to focus on that part, but you can focus on the stuff that, maybe matters to you. However, there's going to be people out there who still want more control or who still want something slightly different. And for those folks, hopefully you can find some value in it or just end up buying or making your own. And I think somebody else in the comments shortly after that talked about how they purchase assets in order to learn from them, and then they end up creating their own stuff. And that's a very valid use case for asset purchase as well as an education.
I admit I do that a lot, although I would say it's less educational from that perspective and more just raw curiosity. I have bought many assets where I'm like, I could make this myself, but they're only charging $10 for it. Realistically, I'll probably make it myself anyway, but I kind of want to see how they did it in case there's something I can steal as a good idea.
Yeah.
Looking for neat ideas and tricks.
Yeah. Ideas. He would
usually they did something stupid though. Most of the time I do it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was the simplest solution I could have thought of. But sometimes you find something really cool.
It's an interesting thing. I've had people on the Discord every once in a while talk about assets saying, well, that's just too simple of an asset. It just does this. And I think to myself, yeah, but you didn't have to do that yourself. That would have taken you an hour or more, especially if you don't know what that feature is yet. It would have taken you an hour at least to do that. You can buy this asset for $10. $10 an hour is not that much, Yeah. So yeah, it's a simple thing, but it does it well, and you don't have to think about it. So
it's also about cognitive load. Like I have a big folder full of snippets of code that I use in multiple projects, and some of them are very small, but like I'd be lost without them because they just make my life so much easier. A good example is I was doing a prototype test I showed Jason earlier where I wanted to do a drop-down box. A standard, you type in a search, it does the fancy autocomplete and drops down some options for you. And I wanted to test with data. I don't want to do the whole tedious thing where you make an array and start typing in results. I want some search results I can get from the internet as a nice, cool autocomplete. So I said, Pokemon. There we go, we'll get Pokemon. And so there is a free, out there, Pokemon API. You can just query it and it'll get lists of all the stuff. So what I did is I typed in list of all Pokemon. I found a .json file someone made on GitHub where they've listed every single one of them with their names and IDs. I then downloaded the file. I built a thing which scraped that file and generated a scriptable object from it. I then built a thing which, when I typed in a search word, it searched my list to find a matching name or a similar name. Then it would take the ID and then it would call a web API to get back the data result set for the appropriate matching Pokemon, and it would display the icon and the whatever moves and stuff it has. And that sounds like a big complicated system, but I have this thing called web that I wrote in a previous project where I can say web.get Pokemon info, type in a URL to the endpoint, and it does the thing. What is it really doing? It's doing an asynchronous task and starting a coroutine and grabbing the data back and then calling JSON convert and deconverting it. But the actual lines of code, there's 5 lines. Do I need to have a separate tool to do that? No. But if I start a new project and I want to write web.get thing from URL, and I can, that's a night and day difference. And if that was an asset or something that I was using and someone showed me a link of, hey, do you want to download? Another one I said earlier, I built a thing where you press buttons and it says quotes. It generates a random quote from The Simpsons and then says it using Replica Studios. That's 3 lines of code because realistically it's call an API, send some data, get back a model, call another API, send it some data, get back a thing, press play. But the magic of that isn't the complexity of the code. It's simplifying it down to get thing, play sound, right? And so I think a lot of it's misunderstood. Is people evaluate code based on how many lines are in the class or how complicated the system. It's about cognitive load. It's got nothing to do with lines or sizes or whatever. How easy is it to achieve your objective? And so the better you do that, the better value proposition the system is. So if you write code such that you can show an image and go, here's what you're probably doing. Here's how you could do it with my thing. Here's a quick GIF or video of why it's good. Here's the price tag. Do you want that simplicity? There you go. I'm pretty sure that's a good sales pitch.
All right, I want to mention two things, and I got a question I want to see Andrew's answer to. So Midnight mentioned that he enjoyed the meetup last week. That was Monday. We had a open game meetup. I think you guys were both there, right? For a little while, at least. Yeah, it was fun. We had a. Oh, you weren't? Oh, well, Jason was definitely there. I saw him talking to people. But we had a couple speakers who gave some interesting talks. One on randomness and one on this new toolkit from Unity for AR developers that was really cool. So I think we'll do another one of those next month. I'm thinking probably just do it like the first of the month every month. So that way it's a different day of the week for people that can make it some days and can't make it other days, and see how that goes. If you're interested in that, just make sure that you're subscribed and watch, and I'll send out an email about it sometime soon. Also, if you wanted to win a Jetbrains writer license, all you have to do is choose a race and class in the chat. You can see 75 people have signed up so far. There's a bunch of races and class options down here. If you can read them, they're a little bit small, but we'll start the battle a little bit before the show ends, and then the winner will receive a 1-year license to Jetbrains Writer. And then I think next week I'll probably start giving out Cinti cards again too. They just got back to me, and I'm going to get some more of those too, so that'll be pretty cool. Now, the question for Andrew. When I want to add something to my game projects, I'm searching for tutorials. Is that the right way to learn? Is this something that you do? I'm curious.
Yes. Yes, that is one of the right ways to learn.
Yes, I tend to agree. Usually I do the same thing. If I want to add something new and I don't know where to start with it, I will search and look at not just one, but usually 2 to 5 different tutorials and guides on things, because sometimes you find one and it's just bad or wrong advice, or it's not the optimal or the newest thing. So I try to look through and see like what makes sense out of a couple things, and then pick the one that that really solves the problem, and then see how that can be implemented into my thing. But
there are times when you look at a forum post, especially the forum post, and you look at that date and you're like, that's 2012. Does this pass the smell test? And you know, sometimes it does. Sometimes you look at it and like, that just doesn't feel right. And I think the further you get along with development, you'll get more of that sense. But yeah, so you look at a few, and I think that the real important thing is to not just take what you found on the internet and copy paste, but rather understand why it's doing what it's doing. Copy paste, sure, the first time. But from that point on, don't copy paste. Type out the code, even though you can copy paste it just to get your little muscle memories working. But then also understand what it's doing to the best of your ability. There are certainly some things that I like with geometry or trigonometry, especially. I do not understand what it's doing, and I understand just to the point where I stop understanding and I realize to get to the next level, it's going to take way too much time. So I understand that there's this, then magical trigonometry happens, and then this. I get that. That's enough for me. But definitely try to understand what it's doing. And then, you know, the reality is I've gone back to the same forum post every 6 months for 3 years because you Google the same damn thing. I've seen it from other people, and I've done this myself, where I have commented multiple times on the same thread just to reiterate that this is the right answer to myself later, because I know I'm going to find it again. Now, of course, I've got my Obsidian sheet up, so I will probably find it from that way. Although I'll probably forget to use that first, and I'll go first for the Google foo, and then I will go back to my Obsidian sheet. But yeah.
You got any thoughts on this one, Jason?
Like every other programmer, I do the same thing. The one thing I might say as an addition is, for me, it's all about intention. So when you go and do some research for something like that, you're doing it for a reason. So you might be looking up, okay, how do I get a bounce angle from a raycast? well, what are you really doing? Well, I'm probably like ricocheting a bullet or something, or doing a laser beam that's got multiple reflections when it hits mirrors or something. Once you've figured out what it is you're doing, make a method called bounce bullet that does the thing. So not only are you keeping the code, one of the biggest mistakes I see is someone going, I've done this before. I figured out the code that does this, like makes a bullet break through multiple layers and like lose velocities, or some cool thing they wanted for a system. And it's written as like, calculate depth collection. So it's like you don't know what that was. At the time, you had an agenda, and your agenda was make bullet that can go through multiple surfaces or something. And so help yourself. In my case, I had a thing I was doing with generating points. I was doing like a bullet hell thing, and I wanted like points in helixes and points that were distributed along spheres, along things. And so I made a thing called a point generator. And then I made a method called generate points along circle. And then I made something called generate points along sphere. If I look at the code, it's a bunch of loops and, pi somewhere in there that does stuff. And like, I don't know math well enough to figure that out. But what I can read the sentence, generate points along circle and generate points along sphere. And next time I want to generate points along circle, I will type into my search tool points circle, and I will find it, because that's what I was trying to do. So make sure that whatever code you find or what you're doing, annotate it by what its intent is, not by what the code is. That's how you'll make your life easier later.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things I learned with programming in general, was that naming your methods for what you want them to be doing and what they're supposed to be doing from the context of the thing that's calling them is like the easiest and best way to improve your code. You just doing that makes a huge difference in code quality beyond anything else, and it's the least complicated thing to do. It's not super simple, because you got to actually think it through, but yeah, I think it's super important to do. I'm definitely losing my voice here. So Stellar asked, how do I join the battle thing? Just put in an exclamation mark in chat and choose a race and class, like Rat Wizard or Berserker Wolf or what is it? You could be a Sunflower Necromancer, and then we'll start the battle in just a few. I think we might even end the show a little early, because I might run out of voice soon. So we might kick off that giveaway a little earlier than normal. So go ahead and enter to win now. Let's see. There are a lot of questions still, so just trying to pop up and catch up with a couple of them. Let's go back up near the top. Here's one. There's an earlier one. Does not playing games affect making games, like not having motivation? Do you feel that you need to play lots of games to get motivated or to be a good game developer? I personally think you need to play lots of games to be a good game designer. I don't know that it makes a huge difference for programming.
It's interesting. I would agree with you on that. It makes sense. You need that experience and just to get familiar with things that others are doing. What I find whenever I play a game, I want to stop and start making my game again or working on my project. And this happened literally last night. I've got my niece and nephew over. My nephew is 12 and a half, and he doesn't get to play as many games at home that he would here, because his computer is a Chromebook from school, and that's it, because his parents don't like tech. And I have an ultra wide and a PC and a mouse that has RGB. And so he wants to play New World and other games. And so, after he went to bed last night, I was like, okay, I got an hour before I really have to go to sleep. So I loaded up New World for the first time in a while. And I was sitting there playing it and thinking, within 5 minutes, I was thinking, I want to get back to making my environment. I want to get back to making my game. I want to get back. And what I find is when I play games, unless I'm just dead tired, I'm just literally chilling out and I'm just trying to relax or something, then it makes me want to make my game. It puts back that motivation.
Yeah, I'm the same. I look at it as research projects, realistically. Like I finished Stray, and I spent the entire game going, how are they approaching narrative? How are they approaching, environmental storytelling? It's like, oh, that's an interesting way to have a character collider. And so I spent the entire time dissecting it and giving me ideas. And it's not just games. I was watching Westworld a couple days ago, and I was watching it and going, all I want to do is go program some AI stuff. I don't actually care about the show anymore. My brain's already focused on that. And then inside the show, They have tablets where they have this like programming interface with UI stuff, and I'm like, that's a very inefficient UI for what they're pretending, because futuristic UIs in movies and TV shows are always nonsense. They make no usability sense in any case ever. So I'm just fishing like, how would I actually do that? And so I'm like thinking about jotting down some notes about how you'd make a tablet-based AI programming interface that has a node graph. And I'm like, yeah, I might do this. And yeah, so I do find that stuff does tend to inspire you. But the worry is people assume you need to have enthusiasm to make a game. It helps when you're like, the tank is low. But again, dirty secret about anything you do, anything that becomes a career for you, it stops being fun at some point. It starts being a career. Maybe not all the time, but there will be large pivoting moments where it's just work that has to be done and it's not going to be fun. And so if you're entirely relying on having enthusiasm as being the like, I'll only work on it when I'm feeling enthused to do it, you will find a lot of times where you've like go weeks or months where you're just not in the mood and you'll get nothing done. So you need something else other than motivation as your driving force. Motivation can be a good kickstart, but you need something else. And that needs to be something you can achieve. And there's a whole lot of books on the topic, but the short answer is there's friction whenever you're trying to do something and it's hard. So the best thing you can do for yourself is not go play a game for motivation, because realistically, you probably want to do that as a distraction. If, as Andrew said, if you're kind of making games, playing a game will enthuse you to go back to making your game. But if you're finding yourself wanting to play games as an excuse, it's actually because you don't want to make your game and you want to give yourself an out to go play games instead. And no, it's research. I'm doing it. Yeah, so that's it can work both ways. So what you need to do is approach the problem you're solving and cut away all of the distractions. And the way you do that is make the problem easy to solve. And so if you've got a big complicated system you're working on, make a smaller one. Instead of trying to build the health system, build a health bar. Instead of trying to do the AI nav mesh thing, just build a scene and see if you can make a cube move across terrain. If you can do that, you've made some step forward in the right direction. So give yourself easier wins, effectively. And sometimes what I'll do is if I completely lose all motivation on something, I'll make a brand new empty Unity project and I'll come up with a fun prototype idea that is vaguely tangentially related to what I'm really doing. And so I'll get some lessons learned and I can then move it into the real project if it pans out. So try not to use games as an excuse as a thing. That being said, I do agree with Andrew in terms of specifically games like Portal. I've genuinely played Portal with a notepad for about 7 hours, stopping every 5 footsteps and going, why'd they put the window there? What's that light for? What did the telegraph for? What's the line of sight for this room? And research the way certain games work. So there's value in that, but if you're doing it as active learning, as opposed to an excuse because you're not enjoying working on your project, you know?
I totally agree. And again, I think for game designers, it's a lot more important to be out there actively experiencing everything and seeing kind of what the new things are and what everybody's building, because otherwise you end up thinking that you've got some original idea that's just a bad version of somebody else's already released game. So which is usually where it comes from me, because that's why I'm a terrible game designer. All right. I'm going to pop this one up here. It says, I'm making an RTS. How do I make an MVP as soon as possible? Because you have to code literally everything. And it just reminded me of RPG or RTS engine, because this is what I literally, when I wanted to make an RTS, which was a couple months ago, I had an idea that I wanted to make an RTS. I thought about it for a little while. I thought, okay, well, I could start coding it up and making the systems. And I was like, oh, yeah, why don't I just grab something that works so I can work on the parts of the RTS that I actually care about. Did that and then realized I probably didn't actually want to make an RTS. I just wanted to solve the problems that were already solved in RTS engine. So I would go with something like this as a starting point, build your game out. And obviously, if you want to recode it from scratch, you can. But if you want to get an MVP out as soon as possible, just whatever, $85, or if it goes on sale and get it even cheaper, build out your game right away. And it has nice working examples with bots and stuff and just worked out of the box. So that's what I would do. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an MVP, then part of that MVP process is going to be stripping out features that you don't actually need to make it an MVP and minimum viable product. So for that, the toolkit like that makes a lot of sense. you're going to probably have some points where you're like, oh, but I want to do this and this does it like that. And that's going to take a lot of work. All right, it's an MVP. Don't do it the way you want to do it. If you're just trying to get the MVP, then go for an MVP and cut out all the stuff. And then these toolkits will be a lot more valuable.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
I mean, I was going to say my blunt answer to that is, what's more valuable to you? 10% of an MMO or a RTS you made yourself, or an 80% complete one where you customize it and prove your idea works? Like, it's too many people pick something that's too big for them. Like, if you successfully made Snake, give yourself a reward and upgrade to making Tetris. And if you successfully made Tetris, move on to make something bigger. And then if you've got 5 under your belt, go for it. Make your first RTS. If you want to start by solving a problem that by your own definition has a whole lot of moving parts, like even using an asset, you won't even know how to use all the pieces of the asset. Like the asset was like looking at $85 or whatever. That is worth so much more than that, not because of the cost of the asset, but because of all the things you're not having to solve. But even with all of that, you still have to learn, how the hell do I use all these things? How do I customize the AI? How do I customize the characters? How do I set up different, things? Like there's enough time and effort in learning how to just use a tool like this that it's comical that you're starting from a blank slate and trying to make a game that is of this scale. If you want to make a game, learn how to make a game and do that slowly,
I agree. Like I said, it was my go-to. So obviously, whoops, hit the wrong button there. Obviously, it's what I would use. There's my quote video from earlier too. Cool. So there was one more question, Andrew, I wanted to make sure to ask you before you had to go. Should they put Stellar wanted to know if they should put assets on the Unity asset store or the Unreal market, or of course both?
Yeah. So I did answer in the chat,
both,
but
right?
I think the short answer is if you can both. If you have to choose one or the other, choose the Unity asset store. It's much bigger. And then my long answer had a little snidey bit at the part at saying always do the asset store first. It's bigger, and the Unreal marketplace just might not accept it just because they don't like you or it. And that's because recently we've submitted our Metal Ghost Knight to the Unreal store, and Oliver, who's probably watching the show right now and did a phenomenal job setting up for Unreal, made a really nice video, all these cool steps, all these cool scenes, all these cool effects, new materials, all this great stuff. And they've rejected it because it doesn't have a jump animation. And they said that all characters who are humanoids and aren't rigged to the epic skeleton must have a jump animation, no exceptions. So they've rejected it until we add a jump animation. And their reasoning is that they want their users to have a consistent experience and to know what they're getting. And I'm thinking, well, that's what the description is for. They can read it and see, oh, there's no jump animation. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't buy this one because I, as a user, need a jump animation. But yeah, so you won't run into that issue with the asset store. They're not that anal. But on the Unreal Marketplace, I've learned that on the Unreal Marketplace, you will get rejected at least 2 or 3 times before they accept you. And sometimes you do have to write in and argue with them over some thing that's just not a thing that they should be worried about, but somehow they are.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old Apple Store days when it was much harder to get things onto the Apple Store, and then Play Store, you put it up there, and like half an hour later it was there, or 10 minutes you hit the button and it published. So that's interesting. I didn't realize it was that different, but it sounds like you definitely want to do both and jump through.
Yeah, it's definitely do both if you can.
Yeah,
and Itch and all the other marketplaces. Why not? If you've got the time and they make enough money to pay for that time, then go for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would do the asset store first though, because it's definitely worthwhile. There was a question about something I had mentioned before, asking if we're still thinking about reviewing, critiquing, and post-morting viewers' games. Yes, I just need to be prepared and planned for it. I want to get like maybe 1 or 2 that everybody can have a chance to try out and play and talk about and be prepared for. So that is something I'd like to do sometime soon. I guess if people have games and you're watching now, send them over now, and then I will distribute it to everybody in the Discord, and then we'll see if we can do some of those sometime soon. I think
Yeah, I love doing those. I am. I have a bit of a reputation in the Wednesday meetup groups set up by you, Jason, a while back. That my feedback tends to be quite brutal. So I've there's a number of people who put their games up, and I try them out each week or whatever, and I'll go away and get a notepad, and I'll come back with, right, let's start with the first 6 steps I took, and the line of sights you drew, and what your telegraphing was, and what makes sense for the character. It's like, I'll go into vivid detail from the kind of research perspective of both, because the code stuff we talk about a lot, but for me, I really love the usability side of things, and so I do a lot of, back in my days working on enterprise stuff, I did a lot of research in user experience and how do you make an application that's fun to use or easy to work with. And then once I started doing games, I started looking into all of that stuff and affordances and line of sight and weenies and how to do one-way valves and, you know, all of the color kind of grading stuff. And it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of stuff that is very small tweaks you can make in your game that will drastically change how people will play them, just coming down to what their expectations are and stuff. So it's, yeah, that stuff's fun. I'd be more than happy to give very detailed feedback of games if people have them.
Yeah. So yeah, send those over, and we'll start pushing them around in Discord and get that figured out. I think that would be a really fun episode. Maybe do a couple games or however many we can get, or I don't know how many we could cover in 3 hours, but however many we could get and cover. All right, let's see. Still a couple. Just hit the wrong button there. There are a lot more questions still. Andrew, do you have time for a couple more, or do you got to run?
Time for 1 or 2 more.
All right, let's see if we can find a good Andrew related one. Oh. Here's one from somebody who's not a programmer. I wanted to develop a game ever since I was a teenager. I even tried when platforms like Unreal and Unity weren't around, and struggle with programming as not a programmer. Any advice for someone like me? Because you started out, I mean, you've done a bit of programming, and I assume that this person's done at least a bit. If they're struggling with it, they've done some too. So what would your advice be to somebody who wants to get started doing this stuff and is having a hard time with the programming part?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so when I started, I loaded up Unity. I got inspired by Indie Game the movie and loaded up Unity. I got books at the bookstore and they had bugs in them, and I got uninspired. So I took philosophy classes instead. And then 6 months later, I saw that damn movie again, and I said, screw it, you can do this. So I loaded up Unity again. This time I found an online tutorial from the Walker Boys Studios. And it was some 2D side-scrolling, but before Unity 2D was a thing, but a 2D side-scrolling thing. And that got me to the point where I was like, okay, I understand enough, and now I feel like I can make my own projects. But like we've talked about, I didn't make the project I really wanted to make. I made a couple smaller things that were more bite-sized. I actually got them out on the Apple Store. One got taken down because trademark, turns out, in the name. Who knew? I didn't know. It wasn't on purpose. And then finally I decided to make my big epic game. Quickly realized it was too big, so I made a slightly less epic game that was still too big, but I did it anyways. And it was one foot in front of the other. Like I said, it was during that process that I learned what a method was. I had released the other games without knowing what a method was because everything was in the update loop and it just worked. It was only when suddenly it stopped working and really it was I remember it was when my enemy scripts were working, they would fight, they would die, they do all the stuff, and then 4 or 5 it was fine. Suddenly there were 20 or 30 and frame rate dropped, and I was like, what the hell? I need to have a lot of enemies on the screen. Why? And I looked at it, used the profiler, and I realized, oh shit, everything's in one update loop. And suddenly I realized, oh, this is what methods are for. This is why you break it up. It shouldn't all be one class. It shouldn't all be one loop. But one step at a time with the programming, learn a bit, try it out, learn a bit more, try it out, realize that you're probably still doing things wrong, or maybe not wrong, but perhaps less good, or perhaps there's other ways and other circumstances to do the same thing that might be better for different situations. It's constantly seek out new information and take it in, watch tutorials, talk to other people, learn from other people, learn with other people, find a group of people who are just like you and show them what you're working on. Ask the question, ask the stupid question. How do I make a prefab? If you don't know, ask it. And hopefully the people you're with will be like, oh, let me show you how, rather than saying, oh, you must be a new person, I'm not going to talk to you. So find your tribe and just take one step at a time.
I think that's perfect. Oh, I got to send myself a picture real quick. I just remembered something I want to show in a second. Okay, sent. Yeah, I think that's exactly what you got to do, though. Just go step by step and keep learning and getting through the little problems. If you're struggling with programming, at least you're programming.
Yep.
Get forward. Yep. There was one more question I wanted to ask before you go, Andrew, if I can find it. I lost it again. Oh, man. Where did it go? Oh, okay, let's just pop up this last one real quick. So, do you agree that 90% of a game's success is marketing? I have trouble marketing my games with 20,000 followers on TikTok. So, do you think that marketing is the most important thing? I think that it's not the most important thing. I think that it's one of two mandatory things. So, the game has to be fun, and you have to have good marketing generally.
We've heard of
sometimes get by without good marketing, but most of the time you need good marketing.
Yeah. We've heard of Flappy Bird. Didn't have marketing as far as I know, but it went viral. But that's not going to happen to you. We also hear about people winning the lottery, and that's not going to happen to you. Doesn't matter how many tickets you buy, you're not going to win the lottery. That's where I'm going to that's the line in the sand I'm putting. Prove me wrong and then buy me a house. But
and even on that note, with Flappy Bird guy, 35 odd games. He bought many tickets before he won that lottery. Keep that in mind.
Yeah. And you're not going to win the lottery without buying tickets too. Yeah. So there's that. I think marketing is hard. Marketing is not easy. There are professional industries out there about marketing because it's hard. So you don't need to be the best at it, because you're not going to be the best at it, but you should try. You should make an effort, see what others are doing, try to mimic the things that seem to work on you. If you notice that something always catches your eye, figure out why it catches your eye, and then mimic that, copy that, steal the good stuff. 20K followers seems pretty good. Engage with them. See if there's ways you can engage with them, I suppose. This is just me talking out loud because I really don't know. I've not had 20,000 followers on my game. So I don't know, but I would imagine just engaging with them and putting out new content, finding what kind of new content triggers a good reaction. Is it a small 1-minute video? Is it a GIF? Is it an email from time to time? Is it a poll? What is it that people are going to respond to? And then kind of keep doing that over and over.
In my opinion, I think marketing is the nice boogeyman that everyone loves to either blame or praise, depending on what happens. It's this magical beast that either makes my games, it's the reason it succeeded, or it's the reason it failed. It's this fantastic excuse bubble that's sitting over there that we can always look at. The truth is, marketing is not some nebulous conceptual thing that if you pour enough money into the marketing box, you get more resources. It doesn't work like that. If you want a bit more details about this, what you're actually talking about is something called engines of growth. So your game is like any other business. It's a startup, and a startup has ways in which it grows. And so if you look at the Lean Startup by Eric, I'm going to blank on the name, but Eric Ries, I think, he talks about 3 engines of growth. So your game or your application can grow because of virality, which is the classic streamers are playing it, so it's popular. It can grow because it's sticky. In other words, it's the kind of game that people will enjoy playing and they want to keep playing because it's got something like a cookie clicker style abundance of like, oh, I want to keep engaging in this to get more resources, or it's paid. and paid is like it's literally there's a financial model investing in why you'd use it. So the point is, your game is a product. A product needs to be sold to people, and the common mistake people make with marketing is you can have 1 million followers, but if you've got 1 million followers who are all, you know, grandmothers on Facebook, that doesn't matter for shit, right? The point is you have to get followers in your target audience who are likely to click your button. And the thing is, there's something called conversion rates, and conversion rates are directly related to your sales funnel. And your sales funnel boils down to not only getting people, but getting people a way in which they can click the things that you're for sale. For example, we've all done this where we're sitting there listening to someone talk about some product and go, yeah, they've made a good sales pitch. I'm ready to buy this thing, whatever it is. And then it's like, where do I go? And there's no links. And that like brief window where they had your attention, that you would have bought it if there was just a nice big button, you're like, yeah, okay, you know what? Never mind. I don't need it. And that was to you just a passing thought. But that's the difference between for them making a sale or not. So it's not just about getting the numbers or getting the names. It's about engaging with them regularly. So you'll notice almost every well-known game out there probably has a web page you've gone to. For example, Tunic, when that came out, people are like, oh, Tunic, this game arrived on Steam and it was massively popular. No, it wasn't. That game has been being marketed for about 3 years. And not like in some abstract, vague way. There was a website with a link where you say, put your email address in here if you want more feedback. And I and many other people put my email address in there. And why? Because I knew the creator is going to email me saying, here's an update. Game is going along. Here's what we're doing. And then that's useful for me because I want to play it. And it's useful for them because they have a person, they can send a message with a big shiny button that says, here's the way to play my game. So marketing isn't just this big thing you can either succeed with or blame with. It's something that is a tool that you have to use effectively like any other tool. And the way you do that is by engaging with it in terms of understanding your audience, understanding your business model, understanding your engine of growth, building a sales funnel through that, and getting people to actually buy and play your game. That's it.
All right. Well, Andrew, I think you needed to run, right?
I do. Yep. I got a niece and nephew who are going to burn the house down if I don't. So I will see you all later.
All right. Sounds good. Everybody, make sure you go check out the Humble Bundle link down below. Grab all of Andrew's assets and a couple of my courses down there too. And some of what was the new one that released? The spiders, right? Low poly spiders.
Yeah.
And that's linked right down there at the top too. So
and speaking of marketing lists, go to infinitypbr.com and sign up for my email list, which I put the sign up at the very, very bottom of the page. So there's that. But you know, remarkably, my email list has actually dropped by about 10% over 2 years, ever since I stopped having a post-purchase login to download the bonus content. So much easier that's on the asset store rather than my site. So I'm not going to go back. But I lost my engine of email signups.
You've got to add a post sign up freebie. Go grab this freebie with it.
Yeah. So this is what you got to do. Go to my email list, sign up, and then next time I send out an email, which will be this week, reply and tell me what post-purchase freebie I should be offering.
Good idea.
Yeah. All right.
infinitypbr.com. All right. See you later, Andrew.
Bye.
All right, I'm gonna kick off the giveaway real quick for people who've entered it. So if you entered the giveaway, you'll have a chance to win a JetBrains writer license. It's a 1-year license. And then next week, I think again we'll probably do some Cinti codes. It looks like it's lagging on my screen share. Why is it so laggy on there?
Yeah, it's laggy on our side too. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it there. On mine, it's like nice and smooth. I need to put it up on the screen behind me, I guess, or figure out why that's so laggy. Anyway, we'll start the battle and we'll see who wins. If you wanted to win, all you have to do is put in a race and class with an exclamation mark at the start. So I'm going to give everybody about 1 minute to do that, and then I'm going to hit the button to start. The 1 minute just so there's a little bit of a delay. I think that the lag on the window, by the way, is caused by Restream. I think that Restream is not giving it full frame rate or something. Like it's giving it 1 frame a second instead of the 60 that it wants to render at. Maybe because they're used to people sharing static images and stuff. You might have to reach out to them and see if there's a way to bump up the screen share option on things when needed. Anyway, I want to do one more question. Let me see. This was about multiplayer. I've actually been thinking about doing a multiplayer video recently, so that'd be good to answer this one. It says, I have a million questions. So networking. Is Photon a viable solution, or should I move to creating my own private server? And I think that the first thing here is just to clarify that with Photon, if you're using Photon Cloud, then they're going to host the servers for you. The other option, unless they've removed it, was the self-hosted one where you would still have to host your own servers. I don't know if Photon is a viable solution for you or not, mostly just because it's going to come down to cost. It's going to come down to the cost per user, how much revenue you're generating per concurrent user versus the cost of those users. So for some games, it makes a lot of sense. You're going to make a lot more money than the costs of the servers. For other games, it may be that you're spending a ton of money on server costs and your average user isn't generating anything. So it depends a lot on the game, and mostly just because of the cost thing in my experience. But do you have any other thoughts on Photon specifically, Jason?
Well, it's worth noting that Photon is it's deprecated now. They're not supporting it. It's Fusion now. If you are choosing to use Photon's stuff, they don't want you using Pun 2 anymore. They want you using Fusion. Right. You'll get more support from that. As for which you pick, it doesn't matter. I could pick Fusion, pick Fishnet, pick Mirror, whatever. Just whatever works to get your prototype up and running. I find
it's not too difficult to switch once you've done it one time. Once you know how the networking system works, they're very similar the way that they're coded and put together. So it does take some effort, but it's not difficult or impossible to switch. At least not in my experience. Unless you have like a giant game that's been going forever, then you build an MMO, it might be difficult to switch your network layer. But if you're just building a regular old game, it's not too hard. I mean, you can just add multiplayer later. All right, I'm starting the giveaway. I forgot about that. Let's hit the button. Lots of people have joined. Got 118 people in there. Make sure that you hit like, because I said so. I don't know. And we'll go on to the next one. So this is a question that we've answered a bunch of times before. How important do you think having a portfolio website is as compared to sending employers something like a Google document? I don't know that I would ever send them just a Google Doc. I usually send them like a Word doc or a PDF of the of a resume, and then a web page.
In general,
I think a web page is generally good.
Never send somebody either a Word doc or a Google Doc. Send them a PDF every single time. If you're going to send them something, it comes down to ease of use. If you send them a docx or you send them a Sheets or something or whatever else, they're going to have some tool to open it. And honestly, if you're the person doing hiring and you've received 50 resumes, that little bit of friction of I'm going to have to go to this person's thing and download a tool and open it, I'm like, you're out. I don't care. You've lost my interest. There's too many other people for me to deal with. And I mightn't even do it on purpose. I might just be like, I'll put yours to the bottom of the pile and I'll start going through these ones first because they're right in front of me. And then when I get to the end, I'll go through the more complicated or messy ones. And who knows, you might find someone in those first sets, so you won't even get to the last ones. So yeah, most of those tools will export for you. Just pick something and make sure you export it out in a very easy and consumable way, which has the added benefit of you having URLs you can embed on the resume. You should also have a link to other websites that are relevant. A common one is at the top right. You should usually put your LinkedIn and your GitHub and whatever else. So keep your resume lean or your portfolio lean, and then link to the other places if they care enough to go that far.
I just switched my camera here. I just realized that my camera view for the fight wasn't showing up. Apparently I've broken a.
Oh yes, paused. Oh no.
There we go. Unpaused, and there. Now we can actually see the fight happening. I think. I don't know if it's laggy for you, but I've got the camera view on.
Seems fine now, yeah.
Okay. I had to get that view fixed up. Let's see. You can't really see him there. Kind of see him there. That'll work. All right. Yeah, and I think overall for the end of that question, a website, I think, is generally worthwhile. I think that it's good to have. It's cheap. It's easy to do. Just get your domain name with your name or something similar. With even if it's just your resume neatly formatted and nothing else on there, like that's a starting point. I would go with something like that and have
I
something.
mean, yeah, like if you want, you can pull up mine as an example. Mine is literally my name, jasonstory.ie, and I have my stuff up there. It is the most boring linear list. So if you click on the top right, there's an about section, and that's just a big list of projects I've worked on. It's about as straightforward and linear as you get because that's what I need. There's people are curious what I've worked on. There you go. There's obviously you format. The truth is, if you really care about a job, a good thing to do is to send a resume that directly points why you should be good at that job. You should, if you're trying to apply to 1 or 2 jobs, make a custom resume that links the skills you've got relative to the job you're applying for. Having some kind of portfolio website or some online resume is really useful as a general catch-all, but you should be targeting whatever it is you're looking for directly when you're making something. So from my perspective, I think portfolios are important in this day and age. It's very easy to do, to have something up there. But I think, as we've said many times before, less is more. I would sooner see a web page which links to 3 cool projects someone worked on than, every small demo they've ever worked on at any time. Personally, I don't actually do that at all. I don't bother linking to every small project I worked on. I would rather link a list of things I've worked on. People can ask me questions, and if they care, I'll go and grab some resources and email them the YouTube video where I was interviewed by Facebook for something or whatever. I'll send them the stuff directly relative to the questions they ask me when I talk to them.
Instead of overloading them with stuff that may or may not excite them, especially when like 9 out of 10 things probably aren't going to be interesting to the person. There's going to be one that they're going to like, and flood them with a bunch of videos and graphics and stuff. So, all right, what about this VR question? What are your thoughts on movement in VR? This came up earlier when we were talking about VR. I've always been a fan of just teleportation movement. I generally that and like free moving around. I've never really liked many of the other systems. The ones where you run with your hands, those work fine for me too, but it just kind of get tiring after a while. And
I just don't like the feeling that you're skiing. It's just there's such a disconnect in what you're doing. They very rarely match what you're going for.
Yeah, my favorite though was still in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand. They have like the whole giant warehouse area set up for VR shooter games where you're shooting with multiple people going into squads and breaking out and separating and then rejoining. That was fun. That kind of movement is the kind that I like, where you're actually walking around, like the free range stuff. But it's not an easy one to do.
My problem with that kind of question is, again, it's like saying, what's the best camera for my game? First person, third person, isometric. It's like, well, what game is it? Isometric is not good for a shooter in that if you're trying to do it like a Doom game. Obviously, it's different for different kinds of games. So the answer of saying what's the best VR movement is like, are you making a game where it's solving puzzles at a table? Well, then teleport's fine. Are you making a game where you're avoiding zombies? Well, teleport can be a little bit dull because what happens is you just immediately teleport to the next safe waypoint and you remove the problem. So it should be it's a gameplay mechanic. It's not just a hack solution. It should directly relate to whatever it is you're trying to do in your game.
So here's one directly for you. Do you ever use structs in programming, or do you just use classes? It says structures, but they're just talking about structs. So yeah, what do you? How often do you find yourself writing public struct, whatever, and versus class? For me, it's like maybe 1 out of 50. It's rare.
Yeah, pretty rare. Because the thing is, right? I could go on this one for absolutely ages, but it's use the right tools for the right job, right? And a struct is a data structure. Its purpose is to be a version of a structured set of data, or to be more accurate, you have fields. Fields are compounded together to make records. Records are then used alternatively as data structures. Data structures are then used as ways of propagating data, like through DTOs. And once you're propagating data, you want to do something with it. And so if it's something that is being passed around a lot, structs are great. That's the point of them. They're very easy to mitigate between the stack heap issues to very quickly move things around. But the difference is that you don't really want to have operations tied to structs. You want to have operations tied to objects, which is the difference. What's the difference between a struct and an object? Some people say it's the fact that it's stack or heap, but no, it's not. The real difference is data structures are structured data. They can be serialized and deserialized perfectly without any loss of information. A object cannot be deserialized and serialized perfectly because an operation cannot be deserialized. You can't, if you have a thing that says capitalized name, you can't really serialize capitalized name. You could replicate it in two different languages, but you can't export it out to JavaScript and then back to C# and back to whatever. So the difference between objects and structures is it completely transferable across a boundary line between two different systems? The short answer is I use it when I need to use it for something. Normally, though, I will stick with classes 90% of the time. And then if something is very performant, that where it's like in a heavy update loop, or I need to do some tight memory stuff where it has to be all stacked together, then I'll use structs. So yeah, again, I use them when I need to use them, I guess. And it doesn't happen that often that it's a big deal, you know?
Yeah, same here. It's rare. A lot of the time I make a struct and then I end up turning it back into a class. Or sometimes I'll make a class and I'm like, okay, this should probably just be a struct and I'll change it. But most of the time I just default to a class. And then like 50% of the time I default to a mono behavior because I'm thinking I'm probably going to want this to be a component and I'll make it a component. And then I might take that away depending on how I decide to use it. But a lot of the time that's just kind of like my instant kind of go-to. So this other question is one that I have not played with yet, which is GitHub Copilot. And they're just wondering if you have any opinions or experience with it, or if either one of us do. But I still haven't really played with it. I don't know if you have. I was curious.
I tried it. Yeah, I got into the beta and I gave it a try and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I'm not saying it doesn't deserve to exist. It's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem I have, and this is like, this is more kind of, it gets into the philosophical point of writing code, which is, what's the difference between code you write and code somebody else writes? If you have two people sitting there writing code, you're both using the same language, you're both sitting there at a computer, typing it into the computer in the same programming language, using the same tools and the same whatever. There's one fundamental difference between you and them, which is what it is you're making, or to put it more accurately, what problems you're solving. So the one difference that matters is what is the unique problem I'm solving. That's why I'm writing code. If it wasn't unique, if it was a common problem, you would buy an asset or you would copy someone else's example. The only thing that's different, but the only reason you were sitting in a chair writing code is because the thing you need doesn't exist. There might be pieces of it out there, but the actual thing you want isn't out there, or you wouldn't be making it. You would just use the thing that's out there. And so at a philosophical level, the problem I have with something like this is it's got a wag the dog problem, where you start writing code and it tries to guess your intentions, which is really cool and looks very interesting. But what happens is you start designing your app around what it's telling you could put here, not around what your actual intentions are. And so some people are okay with that because they're sitting down going, okay, cool. Okay, oh yeah, I guess I'll do this. And you can watch this. You can see experienced programmers. They'll go, okay, so I'm going to make a method. And it's like, yeah, okay, I'll do it that way. Or yeah, and then to get a file. And oh yeah, that's a good solution. They're not making their application. They're making the Lego block collection of whatever it happens to be thrown at them next in the next association of stuff. And if you're just doing something as an experiment, that's fine. If you're doing a test, that's fine. If you're writing an application, you should write the code you need to write to solve the problem you have, not what AI is throwing at your face randomly to match vaguely the words of what you're doing. So I found it distracted me personally because it kept making me question. I would write some code, it would bring something up, and I would read it and go, is that what I need? Does that solve my problem? And as I started using it, I ended up finding out that it was like, it was changing the way I was engaging with my code. It kept pausing me. So it would write the code faster than I would, but I'd be losing more cycles of personal time because I would be now reading, processing, and engaging with, is that the right solution to my problem? Rather than had I just written if raycast do X, right? I could have just written the code I need instead of playing this weird mind game of like matching the code that's there. Again, it comes down to the people and how they work. But for me, after I write code enough, I use the live templates in Writer. I'll just make snippets and I turn it into a couple of keys. So now I can write stuff by doing 1 or 2 letters, and I can autocomplete anyway. I don't need an AI solution to be guessing for me, you know?
Yeah. No, I can see how that could be problematic. I saw Aaron's comment and popped up there. I could see how it could be interesting to do it with a team too. If it starts to pull in like the patterns and conventions just from the team, that could be handy and useful, because then you can might get some good one of the biggest problems I find on a large team is that you'll find that people will solve a problem and then somebody else will come along, and because the solution's not easy to find, they will resolve the problem and they'll do it a different way, and then there'll be another way. And I've seen things where there's like 4 or 5 different ways to solve the same problem because people all rewrote it because nobody knew that it existed.
I noticed utility math stuff does that all the time, where there's like some sort of calculate total price or something, and there'll be 6 different calculate total prices that all do roughly the same thing in different like price utilities or price helpers or, you know, calculator tool, and each one does vaguely the same thing. Yeah, it happens a lot.
All right, let's take a couple more here. Here was one that is kind of a interesting, strange, nebulous-y one, I think. It says, what is your approach for solving annoying bugs that aren't just syntax errors? So here I'm thinking things that are not just like compilation errors too, and there's not like just, you know, a greater than where there should be a less than, or the wrong variable name is pasted in, but where they're bigger, more architectural issues. And I have a solution that I generally follow with this, but I'm curious what yours is too. So I'll start with mine though. Usually when this happens, if I get into the scenario where I've got like some just really confusing, annoying bugs, and I know that it's more complicated than just a couple lines code, there's some interactions going on that are not working out right. I'll do 2 things. First, I'll just make like a simple little test scene. I'll see if possible, I'll make like a new empty scene. I'll pull in the thing that I'm working with and see if I can just track it down right there without the rest of the game. Sometimes that's enough. Takes me 5 minutes and I can be done with it. A lot of the time, though, that doesn't work. And what I'll do is start looking for opportunities to make the code that I'm working on there where I'm having the problem, especially these are annoying bugs, not something that I've been fighting with a bit. And I'll write tests around them. So I'll start to write unit tests, usually some Unity play mode tests, keep it relatively simple, that will spawn the objects, do the things that I want to do, and show me the results so that I can go through, iterate, and test my logic and see the results instantly. So I can figure out, like, is it this thing that I'm trying to fix? Am I on the right path? I can hit the button and see whether or not my results are getting better or worse, and kind of track things down. And that's very often how I'll use unit tests to try to track down these weird things. The most recent one I can think of is building a multiplayer tabletop strategy game, and it was having some weirdness with the navigation. It wasn't working right, and it kept breaking, and it kept having these weird, annoying ones that were more complicated, like side effects of things. And put tests around it, made it very easy to solve and figure out exactly what was wrong. One of the biggest problems was my things were just offset by 1. Like everything just literally offset by 1 caused like 50% of the problems once I realized that. But the tests made that very obvious and exposed it. And the other thing I'll do is add in a lot of debug overlays and gizmos on stuff. So I'll put gizmos on anything where it makes sense. If I think that it should be doing something and it's not, sometimes the gizmo will show me that, oh, I fucked up and I removed the collider, or this is not the object that I think it is. It's an exact copy of it, but it's just one that somebody dropped in the scene or something. I'll get extra info from the gizmo. So what about you, Jason? You got some other techniques?
Yeah, I think that the number one, so to tell the truth, I think 90% of devs I've met suck at testing. And I don't mean like the fancy unit testing, blah, blah, any of that. I just mean if they get into that scenario where they press play and the code doesn't do what they expect to, their actual approach to solving that problem is fundamentally flawed and drives me insane. Because what most people do is they'll run through it, it doesn't work, and they'll go, oh. And so, yeah, they'll click the error, they'll go to the point in the code, they'll look at it, and then they'll just start reading the code. over and over and over. They'll go, okay, okay, no, that's and then they'll run it again, and they'll try it again. They'll keep doing this, and they'll like change a few numbers. They'll try it again. They'll change a few numbers, try it again, and it's basically hitting and hoping, and just like trying to make sure it works. The simplest answer, and it works every single time, is test your assumptions. So if I have a character that's meant to walk up and I press a button and it opens a door and the door plays a sound, and the door isn't opening and then no sound is playing, rewind back in time and say, okay, does the character walk forward? You press play, press W, character walks. Good. I can now rule out 20% of this problem. I don't need to test the walking code. Step 2. If I have to press a button when inside the trigger box for the door, is the trigger box hitting? Write a line of code that I walk into the trigger box, print, trigger box has been hit in trigger box. Cool. I no longer have to test anything to do with triggers. I've now ruled out 20% more of the code base. Next, is the input being detected? While inside the trigger box, to press button, if pressing it there, do one line. Okay, cool. So what you're doing is you are chunking the problem and solving it linearly through until you hit the point where it stops working. And if you get good at this, you can even you can shortcut this a bit and use a divide and conquer algorithm where you don't start all the way at one end or the other. You start right in the middle and go, okay, does the input for triggering the button work? Okay, it doesn't. But if I go back one step and go, does entering the box collider work? Yes or no? Okay, and you can kind of then, you effectively isolate down where the problem is. The point is, I see too many people know there's a problem, know it's in the code somewhere, but what they don't realize they're doing is they are testing kind of the whole code base. They are looking at trying to solve the problem, ranging from the input of movement all the way down to the sound of the audio source. And it's like, you're giving yourself so much work because you're trying to find a needle in this haystack of 100 lines of code when it's only going to be in one place. And the very first thing you can do is, like, your code is running linearly. It's starting somewhere, ending somewhere, and just walk the chain with your code base and find the point it stops working. Isolate the chunk where it's not working and just keep doing that. So yeah, test your assumptions. If you assume it's supposed to be on, I had this exact problem earlier today. I was trying to do something where I was doing an asynchronous call to something, and I had an array of objects, and I was trying to select the right one from the list, and it kept not coming back. I couldn't figure out why. And I was like, okay, this could be any number of reasons. Is it not in the list? Is the flag not there? Is the value not set correctly? Okay, let me just look at the list. Turns out the list was null. It's like, oh, there we go. I could have gone on a huge adventure of checking if it's the flag or checking the values. But what happened was I was creating the objects, but then I wasn't assigning that to the correct array. And when it threw an exception in the asynchronous thread, it didn't fire the exception because I wasn't using the global exception handler. So it just failed silently and returned me nothing. And so again, I could have wasted a lot of time, or I just go all the way back to the basics of what is the first thing that could go wrong here? Let's try that first. So test your assumptions. That's the most important thing, in my opinion.
Without a doubt. I totally forgot too when I started my steps that I skipped past the completely first step that I always jump to, which is to debug and add a breakpoint. Like I pretty much always, here, let me pause real quick and go full screen. But I pretty much always do something like this. I drop in a breakpoint, attach, and figure out what the hell is going on first before anything else. Because usually I can step through, figure out that, hey, my battle manager is null, or one of these cameras is null, or something else, and track down the problem and not have to do a whole lot of extra, more complicated debugging. So I wanted to make sure
on that note, though, there's something that a lot of people don't realize. If you go back to that code for a second where you have the breakpoint.
Yeah.
Just as a note, what you can also do, just as a thing, there's debug.log, debug.log exception. There's literally debug.break. And if you were to write debug.break as a line of code, it's really handy. It will literally pause your application at that point for you when it hits that line of code. And that's just a really useful way to very explicitly say, in this exact scenario at this point in the code base, I wanted to stop and I want to see what's currently happening. That can be quite useful.
Yeah, I've used that a bunch. I would have done it right here, but I don't want to accidentally break.
Yeah, it's running. Yeah,
with the winners up here. But yeah, you do that to break, and you get a pause, and you're stopped right there in execution. You can look at all of the objects. You can look at all of the variables. You can use, by default, it's F10 and F11 to step over and actually execute the code, see what's happening, and step into the method. So it's really, really handy. Mr. Bubbles asked what the difference is between debug.break and a breakpoint. The main thing, it's just in a break all the time when the code runs, instead of you having to be attached and adding that and debugging, right? That's the main difference. Just gonna be automatic. So here we've got the final battle for the giveaway. We'll see who wins this one. It looks like it might be this dragon warrior, but maybe the wizard will come back. I don't think so. It's okay. Congrats to Vicot or Vicot, however you pronounce it. Send me an email, jason@game.courses, and I will send you your free 1-year Jetbrains writer license. Congrats. All right, let me pop that. I wanted to show that code real quick though. So you were saying it was debug.break, and just show everybody what that looks like. So you just go in here, oops, wrong window, and I could say like when it's not equal to fighting and it's trying to switch, I could say debug.break right here, and it'll break into my editor and show me the code right here at this point when I hit that, essentially.
And the other one too worth noting is if you have that breakpoint on the left, if it was say if you right click on it, you can then go to conditional statement, and you could say only break if that is equal to battle state dot whatever, you know.
Yeah, I gotta figure out what I did in my writer window. Do you know how to fix this?
Fix what exactly?
I don't know. It's in some weird oh, that's strange. Okay. For some reason the window was just huge. Never mind. Yeah. Okay. Let's pull up the conditions real quick. Let's see it. Right here. This is the part you're talking about, right?
Yeah. So basically the point is you can literally write anything you like in here as a conditional statement and basically say break on this point if this occurs, which is quite useful because it means you can specifically break and check that something happened, you don't need to rely on like putting in 50 breakpoints. You can make a conditional breakpoint that only breaks when something happens, you know?
Yeah, I use those all the time too, especially if you have code that's calling a lot. Maybe you got like 1,000 units, but one of them is failing. Put in the condition like if this one's name is this unit, you can do it by the unit name or by the thing that it's failing on, and have it break there. Then you can stop. And the other thing that you can do, let me restart execution here real quick.
I will say though, for my hot take is I don't actually breakpoint nearly as much as people probably think I would, because I can't stand the friction of waiting for the whole bloody recompiling, waiting, pausing, all of the nonsense that comes up. So I try to find ways to test my assumptions without having to actually do breakpoints or check the code.
See, now we're breaking every frame. Every time I unpause, we're breaking, and that's because we're going, or because the code right here is running, the debug.break. I think the one that I was thinking of though is debug break. That's the one that actually pops up the editor.
Oh, I've literally never used that one. There we go. I've learned something new.
Yeah, because then it'll debug break, and it should open up the editor in that spot. If I'm remembering right, unless I'm getting myself mixed up. Let's hit play again. Or not. Okay, apparently I'm all mixed up. Maybe that's only when we're attached.
So in my case, what I do 90% of the time is I use context menu on my mono behaviors. I literally would have, if I have a behavior that does something and it's supposed to calculate a value, I would just use the, fail to condition. Yeah, because the condition on it. That's probably what broke.
Yeah, I didn't like my condition.
So
go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, so I just use context menus instead. And so I run the code and like check it. Or there's a whole other topic unrelated to this, is that I don't like spamming my code with log statements because they end up making the code messy and you have to edit them. I know everyone does it a bit because it's quick and dirty and gets the job done. I use decorators, and I will decorate my code with a logging decorator that lets me turn it on and off. And then what I'll often do is I'll use either a Boolean flag or a preprocessor directive for if debug mode. And then I can define debug and everything will log while in debug and then turn it off otherwise. Or if it's a mono behavior, I will literally have the script have a Boolean flag called log, and then internally it have a log function. My script will log itself, but then it won't actually send the logs if I turn the flag on and off. It's the different solutions. I try to avoid having to put in temporary code. Anytime you write code to solve a problem where you're just testing an assumption, there's a non-zero chance you'll break something, even if it's just like you don't think it'll do a big deal. But if you've got an if statement and you don't have curly brackets and you put a log in to test your theory, but what you've actually done is separated the line between the if statement and the line that's executing, your test no longer does what you expect it to, because the log will have broken the code and you won't notice this. And now you've got even more confusion to deal with. So in general, changing the code to test the code is kind of a, it's the kind of the observer problem, right? Like once you observe, you're modifying the outcome of your results. And so I try not to write code to test code,
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do use some debug logs, but minimally, and it's usually for rare things that I'm not expecting to happen. I want to be alerted that happen, or large amounts of things that are happening over time, and I want to kind of see the trend of what's happening with this value. Is this going up like I'm expecting? Is it going down? Like what's going on there? And then I'll remove them right away because I hate the clutter of the debug logs. They drive me nuts. I also really quickly wanted to show that while you're broken and debugging and stepping through stuff, you can move the execution line, so you can go right back up and rerun this line. I can look at like my priority got set to 1, and I can just drag that up. You can also go down in this little execute window, and I can change things like do round camera dot priority equals 0. Set it back to 0 with my semicolon. Now go back over it and see it's back at 0. So something useful when you're debugging it and testing stuff out. Usually when I'm at breakpoints, I find that I drag the thing around a lot.
For me, it's watch variables. I use a ton of watch variables. I don't know where it is on this. So yeah, I think it's there under you have it on the expanded section. You can just declare variables there in the thing, and in the drop down will just let you inspect what the values are.
Oh,
you see there, you've got active scene and all the other stuff. Yeah. I'll often just inspect the values.
Yeah, it's super handy. Debugging is a very useful thing. It's something that I didn't learn about at first when I was coding, and I wish I had. It was something that I found out about long after I started coding. Somebody showed me. I was like, wait, you can do that? I was like, I can just look at this stuff. I don't have to write it out into a console. What the hell? Saved me so much time, because it's definitely faster than a debug log as an option, at least.
But like I said, just as a personal preference, is I find, because here's the thing is log messages to me are pernicious, because what happens is you won't write logs if you don't need them. Then something breaks or you're confused about the results, so you put logs in to verify it. And then you leave them in the code until such time as you're confident you don't need the logs anymore. But if you're dubious the code's working, you'll leave them in there until you're certain, which you never know when you're certain. And so you'll move on to something else and you'll have lots of logs. And then the only time you'll actually delete the logs is when the log console gets so messy that it's starting to annoy you reading other logs, because the other logs are in your way. And now you go back and delete the other ones. And it's this weird cycle of you're just basically building more rubbish until the point that it annoys you and you've removed the rubbish. And it's like, that's not sustainable. And then at some point something will break and you'll be like, oh crap, I have to relog this, but you deleted the log message. So now you're going to rewrite the log back into the old script again to get back the same information, despite the fact that you've already demonstrated that you need to be able to inspect that variable because it might change to what you expect. So rather than writing logs, why not pause, evaluate the fact that you can't see the outcome, and give yourself a way to inspect that variable? In my case, I give myself a public accessor, I make a custom editor, and I will literally write values in the custom editor. So if I have something that does things, I will have a literal custom editor tool with a tab on it, which says state of the objects, current state of thinking, what it's doing, what the values are. And I'll be able to inspect the values in the editor if I feel like it's something I want to do, without going and doing custom watches and logs and pausing the application and doing whatever. So if it's important enough to inspect, I upgrade it to be something that's inspectable. If it's not important enough to inspect, then I won't inspect it,
Yeah, that's generally good advice. I think the editor tool part thing would be useful for people to see too, kind of see that in action sometime. I think it's a cool thing to have, being able to see that. A lot of time I'll use the debug view too. I did want to mention though that the one type of logs that I tend to leave in are error logs. So if something breaks and there's like a broken state for stuff that I know could happen because somebody broke a prefab or left something out, something that I'm expecting may pop up again, then I will usually write big error logs that are usually try to be detailed with what the problem is and what the likely solution is inside the error log, so that it's not just, hey, this thing is null, because that's not that useful. I could figure that out without the error log. More like this is null because you probably forgot to add this object to the scene that needs to be there, or something else similar to that. Like whatever the scenario is that I'm expecting it to break in, or where it broke before.
Yeah, and I've had this debate with URI before, which is the kind of question around the concept of exceptions. I think we've all said at some stage the famous quote that exceptions are by definition exceptional and should only be used in an exceptional case. But here's where I think people misunderstand that sentiment, which is exceptional doesn't mean, oh my God, that's so rare, I never imagined that could happen. Exceptional means it is outside of what is expected for this event to occur. And an array that's meant to have values being null is exceptional. It is this shouldn't happen. It might have being empty isn't exceptional. It might not have values in it, but it being null in a serialized script where it should have values is an exceptional case. Similarly, with people trying to get a value at index -1 in an array, that's maybe something you can hack your way around by clamping it to the range or rounding it or doing something, but you're not solving the problem. You're hiding it, which makes it harder to debug later. So if some scenario happened which led to somebody selecting the value -1 in an attempt to find the index of that value, that is, by definition, exceptional. It is a non-standard case that has occurred, and you should respond accordingly. So I will actively throw exceptions in my code, and people are like, oh, but that's going to slow it down and be bad. It's like, well, good, because if you're at a point where your code in a built version is like trying to get an index of -1, you don't want that to be carried on in your code base, because it's your code base is kind of this thing that over time, think of it like it's a level of stability. And every time you like let one of these things through, it just like slowly wobbles the stability of your application until stuff goes wrong. So if something's going to go crazily wrong, like -1 values, I want it to break very early so I can capture it and resolve it at a higher level point. So yeah, I'll throw exceptions quite a lot until the application doesn't throw exceptions anymore. That's when I'm happy, you know?
So there was a follow-up question on your editor script. Do you show all of your scripts in there, or is it just like specific things that break? So do you kind of like wait until you need to see something like, oh, let's go add that into my editor script so I can do it? Or do you just like default drop everything in, or you just have like an attribute that you just pop on the top of a script and suddenly it magically appears?
I try not to write things I won't need. And so I used to do that. I actually tried to be smart once and write this really clever base class, which I extend from, and had all these magical reflective tools, which showed all these like cool stats and things and gave me values. And it just ends up making everything messy and complicated. There's no need to do that. So now I just make a thing. Like if I have stats in my game, I make a class called stat, then I make a class called stats, and then stats is a collection of stats. And if at some point I look at it and go, hold on, one of these stats is value -10. It's meant to be 50. So, okay, well, now I need to know what stats are doing. So I go to my stats editor, and I make a tab called debug. And in debug, I list any stats, and maybe I like turn red any ones where the values are in negative. And now I can go, oh, there we go. I can now see all of the stats which are negative. And I have a very clean and declarative way to solve what I need to. And then if I'm later on working on I don't know, an inventory, and I'm doing an inventory, and then suddenly it's like, oh, so there's things here where the price is -50. It's like, oh, I would love to do a debug and do this stuff. Like, hang on a second. If I'm just going to paint red all of the things which are -50, maybe I now have a case for something called a, debug tab for collections. So then I'd make that, and then I would put that in my editor, and now I can have any way of debugging that. But, I let the problem occur, I let it occur again, and then I encapsulate the thing which now has more use cases. So I don't try to preempt solutions. I will write the code as I need it, and the tools you'll eventually build a library of tools that are directly relative to what you're doing, because that just happens over time.
So there are a couple of people talking about Odin in here too, as an option for that, and that's one of the things
I don't use it either. We talked about that before. It's like I think it's really well written. I think the guys are very smart, but it's just too much for what I'm doing most of the time. Although the Odin validator is like really good. It's still something that I'm really trying to find more use cases to use it, because it's really, really well written.
Yeah, I like their tools a lot. I tend to just pull it in by default if I'm not doing something that I have to share. So I know like you do a ton of client projects and make it a nightmare for you to deal with it in licensing, and probably overkill for most things you have. But I use it for even 1 or 2 features out in every project is enough for me to pull it in. There was something else. Oh, there was something that popped up that I wanted to show on screen real quick. So good news, Jim said there's Starfighter General MMO dev, and that they were helpful before, so I had to check it out and see it. It's up here on Steam. Looks kind of cool. I have to share the link too. Get some reviews. This could be like one of the game. We were talking earlier about reviewing games and talking about the gameplay and giving some feedback on stream. So if you're interested, maybe we could do this one. Send me an email. We'll check it out.
Yeah. Sure.
I love space games. I actually let me see. Let's see if I can find the one. I was showing you earlier.
You were literally working on one here.
Yeah, this is like when I get bored in bed and I can't sleep, I start to write code and make games. I started making a little space simulation game where ships come in and buy and sell things. You can upgrade your space station, do some stuff on it. It started off as little cubes and capsules. So it's like my normal default of capsule and cube world everywhere, with the ships are like different color capsules and the stations were different color cubes. And then I spent an hour grabbing assets and pulling them in and redoing the UI and putting in some little character portraits and stuff, and had a lot of fun with it. But I'm a big fan of space games and sci-fi stuff, so I'd be happy to check it out too. I guess that was my point. And also, I guess go ahead.
No. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just say with that space game, it's very similar to some of the stuff you were saying earlier with like the way that I make everything in there, and not a whole lot of preparing and planning. Just like I need ships, so add a ship script. Yeah. I need a ship to move. I drop that into the ship script. Then I need a station, add a little station, and then I need docking for the ships and make a little dock script that they fly to, and need them to buy and sell things and make a buy and sell script that does that. Like it. Relatively simple. And then eventually, once you do the first one, so I did the first one with fuel, made all the code. It was hard coded, just bought and sold fuel. I was like, all right, I want to add a second one. Added, I think, food. And I was like, okay, well, it's time to add a third one. No more just copy pasting. It's time to do like a scriptable object type thing and put in some actual data there and have it be, a thing where I know I want to have a bunch of different resource types. Eventually they should change, but I didn't start coding it that way from the beginning because I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to lay it out and what was going to make the most sense. So I like to just kind of go step by step.
I think what might be a bit shocking for people is when I start a brand new project, I don't even import my own library of tools. I don't that's it may seem obvious, and there's like a 90% chance I will use it, but I'm not going to make an assumption that I'm going to need my own tools in a new project. I will start with absolutely nothing. And even if like I literally have scripts in my helper libraries that automatically do raycasting and checking surface stuff. And like I had a project recently where I had a camera projected onto a render texture. The render texture was then on a UI in a scaled differently. And then you could move your mouse within the bounds of the render textured image, and I wanted to raycast through that render texture and get the position in the world space relative to where that is, which you can imagine has some weird positional stuff because you're not using the bounds of the screen, you're using the bounds of an image, which is a different render texture scale of whatever. And so I had a bunch of helper code which does the whole there's a get position in rect, convert that to viewport, convert viewport to ray, raycast from the thing. It's a whole pile of stuff just to get an accurate position within the range of the thing. And whenever I want to do something with that, you'd assume I'd bring it in, it solves the problem. It's like, no, I'm still going to start from scratch and go, if raycast, do thing, whatever, because that's such a presumption. I'm going to need the complexity of that one problem that solved that one thing that one time. And so sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. And so even my own obvious common scripts, I don't start with that assumption. Although I usually do end up breaking and adding it eventually. But I try to give myself the challenge of starting off with none of that to begin with.
Yeah.
I thought because it came up a few times, people are curious about the editor tooling. I thought I'd show something. I have one here.
Okay. Yeah, you want to pop it up?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm going to answer Moga's question on the scale of the assets real quick while you do that. They are real world scale. So it's actually like a full on space station you can walk around in with characters at normal scale. And my thought is eventually we would probably do that, allow it, pop the doors open and all that. fly to do space station building and other stuff. They make it kind of crazy. I don't know, but yeah, that's the scale it's at. All right, let's pop up your screen here. There we go.
Yeah. So this is a example of a custom editor tool I've made. It's the one we literally talked about as well, funnily enough, before the show started, where it's about quotes. And I'm actually making this for my Discord because a common question comes up about it's like the classic question of, should I save to JSON? Should I save to XML? Should I save to binary? And I keep answering with the same answer of, it doesn't matter. And people are like, well, it does matter because I need to know whether it's database. I need to know whether it's, and I'm like, no, you don't understand me. It doesn't matter. Like, it truly, truly doesn't matter. And so to prove my point, I was like, I want a thing that displays quotes. And I want to be able to display quotes regardless of the source of them. And so I went and found an online API that had sources for quotes. And so this was a Breaking Bad quote source thing. Whenever I press generate, it would find a new quote and get it from somewhere. But then I thought, to prove my point, I wanted to have different quote sources. And the idea is these APIs online, I didn't write them. They're in different shapes. And so you'd assume it's a complicated problem to write lots of code to solve lots of scenarios to convert between different cases. That's the equivalent of different file formats or different save formats or whatever. And so I did one, then another, and then another, and then 33 to prove the point that it doesn't matter what the source comes from, because at the end of the day, this script doesn't care, providing you write the code in a way that doesn't require that. So I can generate anime quotes. I can generate apparently advice quotes. I can generate Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Oh, that's Britney Spears quotes, apparently. I just, whatever free quote API I found online, I just used. And then I then decided to add support for Replica Studios. So I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but
I'm not hearing anything.
Okay. Can you hear that? Okay, I
No.
guess not. Either way, when I press play, it goes to Replica Studios. It takes that quote, sends it to their API, comes back with the sound effect, and then plays the sound effect for me. So you can see there's an empty file here. That's because it generated data of the WAV file. Anyway, all of that's irrelevant. The only reason I even show this is to say I've got this concept of lots of quote providers. From Chuck Norris quotes, motivational quotes, Zen quotes, but surely this script is huge and it's going to have a lot of if statements or checks or whatever else, right? And there's events over here, like you can listen to when a quote's been loaded in, you can capture the array and display it somewhere. And then there's have an about section that explains what it does. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. So if we look at this script, which probably should have opened Writer in advance, but I didn't. So this here is the quote script that we just looked at.
Can you zoom that a bunch? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is it, and it's doing all of the quote stuff. Once Writer's finished processing it, I'll talk through what's happening.
So you get some quotes and an event for when they're loaded, huh?
Pretty much. That's all the script needed. And so the point I want to get, I'll kind of go through the details here, but so this is it. It's 36 lines of code, and that's including an event at the bottom, which it could be in a different file. All I'm doing is have an array of quotes. I have a quote event. I have the results of the quotes, and then there's a load function. Load takes in some source to get quotes from. It then gets that source, generates quotes from it, and then returns the results. That's what.
Can you double that zoom for all the people with little tiny screens?
Yeah,
sure. Zoom? Yeah, just controls. There we go.
Yeah. So nice. I guess the first thing to point out here is there's this concept of quote sources. Like where do I get the quotes from? Well, this is quote sources. It's. I talked before about each thing has its own job. Well, this thing's job is to pick a source, get one of them from it, and then generate the quotes from the source. But its job isn't to manage quote sources. And so if I go to quote sources, that's this script. And again, we come back to the whole idea of, do you write the code in advance or whatever? This is a complicated solution, but it's not. I didn't start here. And I'll show you how I started and got to here later. But what this does is effectively, when it instantiates on load, it will get all available sources to a list and marks it as loaded as true. And what does that mean? Well, it grabs the currently loaded assembly, selects all types which implement from a certain interface of iQuote provider, and then instantiates an instance and puts in the array. So I'm not actually writing or dragging in or using a list or using any scriptable objects or anything. I'm just using this. And if any script in my entire project happens to inherit from this, there's apparently 41 now, I must have added more, this will automatically add, instantiate, populate the list, and it'll be in the list for that dropdown next time I go to look at it. So I've added new ones later, and it just appeared in that list. I don't have to do anything else. And here is all of the individual providers. So if we pick one of them,
got a lot of quote providers.
Yeah, because I really wanted to highlight, because I kept getting those questions of like, I need to know the answer to all of these questions. Like, where is it saving and what's the API and how does it look like? I'm like, no, you just need to know the contract. The contract is my application needs quotes, something gets me quotes, and beyond that point, I really don't care. I don't care if they come from a file. I don't care if it's a JSON file. I don't care if it's an array. I don't care if it's a database. I don't care if it's generated by some API or some AI. It doesn't matter. The point is, my application cares about this and nothing else. And so I made 40 different random implementations from different stuff. So if I go to one of my favorites was the Simpsons one. So Simpsons quote provider. This is the quote provider for the Simpsons. What does it do? Well, it has a get quotes function, and it calls simpsons.get, and it has a default amount of quotes it returns. And that's it. And there's this concept of this is a model factory. So without getting into too much complexity here, but this is basically when you talk about model binding, this is kind of the magic about how it works so simply, which is the Simpsons API has a version of a quote. That's what it uses. This is what a quote looks like to the API that returns Simpsons quotes. A lowercase q quote, character, image, and character direction. Now, I don't need that information. What my application needs is this shape of a quote, which is a author and the text. And so by using this in my application and creating this factory here, which effectively is a model converter, where I take in one model and spit out the other model, I can say, get quotes as Simpsons provides it, select them as my quote, and return it as my quote type. And so now this is it kind of obfuscates the complexity of what's really happening and returns it in something the rest of my application cares about that keeps it clean. And the benefit of this is the Simpsons one, but if I show you a different quote provider, so I can say quote provider and go famous person quote provider, it's going to look remarkably similar. Get quotes, famous person get quotes, and then I return it as a quote. Or if I get the Modern Family quote provider, so this is the actual quote system, but then there's the quote provider. Quote provider. Let's go to Avengers quote provider. Why not? It's get quotes from Avengers, select to quote, whatever. And so all this does is it maps. Apparently, this one uses text. This uses quote and character. I use text and author. So this hides that level. So when I say it doesn't matter, I really mean it doesn't matter. If this was shaped like a database or shaped like a text file or shaped like whatever, my code shouldn't be written that it requires a certain shape to work, because then I have to refactor my code if the shape changes. My code has this shape, and everything that I use, I make it the shape that I need before I consume it. So that's basically the idea of how this all works. And then each one of these is just a straightforward wrapper. And so each of these are small too. This is the Avengers one. There's some API I get online. There's some get function. This is a web class I talked about earlier. I can basically just say results equals web.get that model from this URL. And then I have my own I have my own object called a web result, which I then use to wrap that so that I can check if it's succeeded or not. And if it doesn't, I have an array of errors. So I can do stuff like get the data, get the exceptions, and I can handle in the case it failed for whatever reason. But again, they all look the same, right? That's kind of the point here, is that if I was to open up the code here again, and if I was to show you the folder, so these are all the different providers, and then these are the sources of those providers. So geek quote apparently looks like that. And again, same thing, URL, web, get, return, whatever. So you can imagine when I say I did 40 of these, like I found an API, I copied and pasted this, I changed the name, changed the URL, and off I go. I could like generate this too. I could use a T4 template and have this auto-generated. But there hits a point of...
Oh, your audio got weird. Is it just me?
Oh.
That was weird.
Okay.
Maybe it's me.
Yeah.
It sounds all staticky.
Oh, well, yeah, let me know if it's still not working for anyone else. But yeah, basically the point of diminishing returns and automating this stuff. Like, I've already automated it so that the actual UI auto-populates. And
your audio got broken for everybody, apparently.
Oh, yeah. Let me... Oh. Maybe if I stop sharing. Does that work? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, all better now.
Weird. Okay. Must have been something with sharing.
Turned into $1.
yeah. You get the idea. The general point is that when people ask about the editor tooling, I didn't start with a complex editor tool. I started by writing, I want to get quotes. I made a thing called get quote. I then printed a quote to a console, and then I was like, okay, that works. Well, now I want to get quotes from somewhere else. So I said quote provider. So I got a quote from a quote provider, and the first quote provider was just an array of quotes that I manually typed. Then the second quote provider was a scriptable object that contained quotes. Then the third quote provider was some API I found online. Then I was like, okay, I now have 3 quote providers. I don't want to keep doing this every time. So I made a thing which said find all quote providers and show those. So I did that. And that worked for a while. And then I was like, okay, cool. Now I want to not have to drag these into an array in an inspector every time I want to do it. So then I made a thing at a custom editor tool, and the editor tool would then show the list of quote providers. And now I end up at the place where when I want a new one, I can drop one in. It'll automatically self-register. It'll automatically do the whole thing. But I don't start there. And that's the number one thing I keep trying to get across, is that you don't need to know every answer, and you don't need to start with the complex thing, and you don't need to have a big giant graph of all of the stuff. You just need to solve each step of the problem bit by bit, only what you need, and then over time it'll get more complicated for the solution to the problems. And so just write the code you need. That's kind of that's the general same principle.
Yeah, I agree. And now I want to follow it up with this question though that popped up. So it said, I understand the value of doing things on the fly, but don't you guys think there's some value in creating at least a brief design document? And I think that just to clear up any confusion, I don't think anybody's saying that you shouldn't have a design doc or a design plan if you're building out a game. Like, you're actually building your game, you should definitely have the design done. I think we're thinking and talking more about the specific implementations of the way that we're going to deal with the code than with the actual game and what the game is designed and how that's going to come out. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think this is far easier than people think it is. Like, if you're planning to climb a mountain, you don't say, you don't need to plan. You don't need to plan for everything. You need to, of course you need to plan. You need to have your supplies. You need to have your backpack. You need to know what you're doing, whatever. But if you write down a list of what I'm going to take 4 footsteps forward, then I'm going to take 2 steps to the left, then I'm going to take, that's stupid, because it's going to change. You don't know what's going to be there. You don't know what's going to be in your way. The problem is, if you're designing classes and drawing lines between the classes, that's like planning your footsteps for your journey. If you are planning, I need a thing that does stuff with saving and a thing that does stuff on the screen, and then that thing is going to need to know about the input for the mouse, that's like planning, we're going to take this trail and we're going to bring this pack of supplies. So know what technology stack you're using, know what plan you're going to approach, break it down into units of work, choose what you're going to work on it in bites. Don't try to plan for things that you're not using, and then course correct. So don't make decisions that you can't course correct out of later. That's basically it.
Yeah, very important part. Definitely got to do lots of course correction when you're making projects in general, if you want to be successful at least. All right, this question came earlier. It was about voiceovers. You were talking about the replica stuff, so makes sense that it popped up. It says, I want to do free voiceover work for games to get feedback on if my voice is good enough or not. Do you think people would be interested in my offer? I think it would probably be hard to get people to do that, and it would be hard to get a lot of value out of that for you. I think that you'd be better off recording a bunch of samples and just putting up a Fiverr gig and see if you can get people to hire you right off of there. Just make it cheap at first. Let people hire you for $5 to start, get some reviews, see what kind of feedback you get, but put up, maybe 5-10 different samples of different voice styles and the things that you can provide, and then you'll know instantly if people like it or not, because they'll start spending $5 to order it. You start at the price really low, you'll know whether or not people think it's good enough. There aren't a whole lot of people on Fiverr with voiceovers. There might be a couple dozen, and most of the experienced ones are a bit more expensive. So I would just try that. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
There are a couple of places for this. Back in my day, there was something called the Voice Acting Alliance. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a website full of people who were just amateurs trying to get into voice acting, and they were offering their services for either free or cheap on projects to build a portfolio. These days, there's something called the Casting Call Club, which is very similar. So basically, there are websites where you can register an account, you can put your stuff up there, and you can basically put samples of your voice, and then people can reach out to you and offer you gigs. So there are websites like that out there. There's a Facebook group for this stuff too. I'm not in voice acting myself. I've done like 3 bits of voice acting in my entire life for different projects, so there's not much. But I did enjoy it. There was one recent one, yeah. But so my point is there is ways to do this. And the best way to do it is just have a portfolio in a place where people would look for stuff. The truth is, like, for anything you do, whether it's art or programming or voice acting or music or whatever, somebody somewhere wants that and doesn't know how to get it. And so the trick is just finding a way of putting your stuff out there to the right people. The truth is, professionals are probably not going to hire randos online. That's just a fact. They're just not going to do that. So what's going to happen is they're going to hire people who have a professional portfolio or that they like already from other things. So what you need to do is, if you're intent on doing this as a career, find the, quite frankly, small crappy indies who can't afford you, and then do it for cheap or quick, for whatever, just something that will get enough portfolio work that you can demonstrate yourself. So usually go to game communities, go to any Discord which has a showcase channel, and reach out and say, hey, I like your game. This character looked cool. I have a cool idea for a voice for them, and then record a clip and just literally fucking DM them and go, here's how I think your character could sound. If you're interested, give me a shout. Like, you might need to be proactive, but then once you've done that a few times, you'll start to build a portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I didn't know all those things existed either. I guess that's why I'm not the one answering all the questions. All right. Well, I think about ready to wrap it up for the week. I wanted to quickly mention the bundle again, the Humble Bundle that's available. It's down below. You can click and grab it. It's got all of Andrew's, not all of Andrew's, a lot of Andrew's stuff, some of my coursework stuff, and it's definitely worth the $30. There's also that sale that's going on right now that I think I've linked down below on the asset store. A bunch of stuff's on sale, a couple things that I really like. And a question about mastermind groups. Let's see. Still looking to add new people to our mastermind group. Anybody still waiting for placement? There are a lot of people still waiting for placement. It looks like they're looking for somebody who could join a mastermind group that meets right after this show, apparently. So if anybody's interested in joining that group, send me an email and I will forward your info over. Maybe they can hop in and join. And if you're interested in getting in your own group later, make sure that you come around next first of the month. I think we'll do it. We'll do mastermind, matchmaking, and a meetup all at once and stuff. So it should be fun. Other than that, make sure you like, subscribe, go check out Jason Story's coffee page and join his Discord. Yep. There's a lot of great chat in there. I constantly watch it. I watch it more than I watch my own Discord because you and Uri are back and forth talking in there, and I just like watching your conversations.
I also made it easier to find. I knew that the Ko-fi link was always a bit kind of ko-fi.com/whatever. It's now jason.guide or jasonstory.ie. Either will get to my website, and there's a link. You can then either join the Discord from there, or you can view some of the code I have up publicly. Some of that quote stuff is actually up on GitHub and NPM. You can download it and have a look. There's also links to YouTube stuff I've been on. So there's actually videos I've been on Jason's channel before where he's interviewed me for stuff, and then other channels I've been on as well. So if you want to see more content, it's all up on that website. So there you go.
Yep. Go sign up, join, say hello to everybody once you get in there. And then I guess we will see you next week. So thanks. Oh, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the stream and all that stuff too. And drop a comment after as soon as it ends. Just say hi or something. I don't know. All right. All right. See you all. Yes. See you soon. Everybody. Bye, everybody.
Good luck.